The bruises hidden beneath Eleanor Whitmore's sleeves told a story she'd never spoken aloud, a nightmare she'd endured for 3 years in Boston's most respected household. But tonight, in the darkness of a westbound train rattling toward the Colorado Territory, she'd made a choice that terrified her more than staying ever could. She was traveling to marry a complete stranger, a rancher named Caleb Mercer who'd answered her desperate letter seeking escape disguised as matrimony. What if he was worse? What if there was no worse? Either way, there was no turning back now. If you want to see how Eleanor's dangerous gamble unfolds, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The train lurched, and Eleanor's head cracked against the window frame hard enough to make her vision blur. She didn't cry out. She'd learned long ago that making noise only made things worse. Outside, the landscape had transformed from the dense forests of the east into something increasingly alien, endless grassland that rolled like a frozen ocean under the March sky. She'd been traveling for 6 days, 6 days of stale bread, suspicious looks from other passengers, and nights spent rigid in her seat, unable to sleep for fear someone would notice the way she flinched when men passed too close in the aisle. The yellowing bruise on her cheekbone had faded enough that careful positioning of her bonnet mostly hid it. The ones on her ribs and upper arms were easier to conceal, though they still sent sharp pains through her body whenever the train hit a rough section of track. She'd gotten careless 2 weeks ago, had spoken when she shouldn't have, and Thomas had reminded her of her place in his household with the methodical precision he applied to everything. Thomas Whitmore, her cousin, her guardian since her parents' death from consumption when she was 17. Boston society called him respectable, charitable, a pillar of the community. Behind the locked doors of his Beacon Hill mansion, he was something else entirely. Eleanor pressed her gloved fingers against the cool glass and watched her reflection stare back. A woman of 22 who looked older, her dark hair pulled severely back, her gray eyes holding shadows that had nothing to do with the dim light inside the passenger car. "Excuse me, miss." She jerked away from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. The conductor stood in the aisle, his weathered face creased with concern that made her immediately suspicious. Men didn't show concern. They showed interest, and interest always came with a price. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice gentler than before. "Just wanted to let you know we'll be pulling into Denver Station within the hour. This is your stop, isn't it? I remember you asking about it back in Omaha." Eleanor's mouth had gone dry. She managed a nod. "You being met there, miss? It's not really a place for a lady alone, if you don't mind me saying." "I'm being met." The lie came easily now. She'd practiced it so many times during the journey that it almost felt true. "My fiancé will be waiting." "That's good then. That's real good." But the conductor's eyes lingered on the edge of her bruised cheek, the one her bonnet didn't quite hide, and Eleanor saw the exact moment he decided not to ask about it. "Well, you take care, miss." She waited until he'd moved 3 cars down before allowing herself to breathe properly again. Her hands were shaking. They'd been shaking on and off since she'd climbed out Thomas's second-floor window with nothing but a carpet bag and the clothes on her back, leaving behind 3 years of hell and a cousin who would be absolutely furious when he discovered she'd gone. The letter was still in her bag, folded and refolded so many times the creases had begun to tear. She'd found the matrimonial advertisement in a newspaper Thomas had discarded, one of dozens seeking wives for lonely men in the Western Territories. Most had made her stomach turn with their crude descriptions and barely concealed desperation. But one had been different. Rancher in Colorado Territory seeks wife for companionship and help managing homestead. Must be hardworking and honest. I am 32, of sound health and temperament, with a modest but growing cattle operation. I can promise safety, a roof overhead, and fair treatment. If interested, write to Caleb Mercer, care of Denver Post Office. Safety. That single word had hooked into her chest like a fishhook. She'd written back that same night, crouched in her locked bedroom by candlelight, crafting careful lies about her circumstances. She'd portrayed herself as an orphan seeking a new start, which was true enough. She'd mentioned she was educated and capable of hard work, which was also true. She'd left out the bruises, the fear, the way she sometimes woke gasping from nightmares of Thomas's hands around her throat. His response had arrived 3 weeks later, forwarded through a friend she'd sworn to secrecy. The letter had been brief, almost awkward in its formality, but it had included train fare and simple instructions. Come to Denver. We'll marry there and travel to the ranch together. If you change your mind at any point, the return ticket is yours with no obligation." That last part had almost made her cry. The idea that she could change her mind, that she had a choice at all, felt like the first bit of kindness anyone had shown her in 3 years. Of course, she had no intention of changing her mind. There was no going back. Thomas would never forgive this betrayal, this theft of his property, because that's how he saw her, as something he owned. If she returned, if he found her, the beating would be worse than anything she'd endured before. The train's whistle screamed and Denver appeared on the horizon like a fever dream. A sprawling collection of buildings and church spires set against the backdrop of mountains so enormous they didn't seem real. Eleanor had seen sketches of the Rocky Mountains in books, but the sketches hadn't prepared her for the sheer overwhelming scale of them, the way they seemed to wall off the entire western edge of the world. The train began to slow, brakes squealing, and Eleanor's stomach twisted into knots tight enough to make her nauseated. She gripped the handle of her carpetbag and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person instead of someone on the verge of panic. What if Caleb Mercer wasn't at the station? What if he'd changed his mind? What if he took one look at her and realized she was damaged goods, too afraid and too broken to be of use to anyone? What if he was worse than Thomas? The platform materialized outside the window, crowded with people, luggage, vendors selling food and newspapers. Eleanor stood on legs that felt like they might give out, steadying herself against the seat back as other passengers began gathering their belongings and pushing toward the exits. She was the last one off the train. The platform smelled like coal smoke and horse manure, and something cooking that might have been sausages. The noise was overwhelming after days of mostly just train sounds, people shouting, a baby crying, somewhere a dog barking. Eleanor stood beside her carpetbag and scanned the crowd with rising dread. A man stepped forward from near the station house wall. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty range clothes and a hat that shadowed his face. Eleanor's breath caught, and she took an involuntary step backward, her spine hitting the side of the train car. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice was deep but not loud, almost hesitant. He removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features, dark hair, and eyes that might have been brown or hazel. It was hard to tell in the station's chaotic light. He looked older than 32, though whether that was from age or just hard living, she couldn't say. "I'm Caleb Mercer." He made no move to come closer, seemed to sense her fear even though she was trying desperately to hide it. "I'm glad you made it safely. The journey must have been difficult." Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Mr. Mercer." "Just Caleb, if you don't mind. I'm not much for formality." He glanced at her carpetbag. "Is this all you brought?" She nodded, unable to form words. Her throat had closed up. Caleb's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "All right then, there's a preacher not far from here, if you're still willing. Though if you've changed your mind, I meant what I wrote, no obligation. I can get you a room at a respectable boarding house and a ticket back east if that's what you want." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended, almost frantic. "No, I want to. I'm willing to proceed with the marriage. If you still want to." Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or confusion. "Miss Whitmore, are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine." Another lie. "Just tired from the journey." He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor had to fight the urge to look away. Thomas always got angry when she looked away, said it was disrespectful, but Thomas also got angry when she looked at him directly, said it was insolent. There was no winning. "Well," Caleb said finally, settling his hat back on his head, "how about we get you something to eat first? There's a decent place just across the street. Then we can see about the preacher, and I'll get us a hotel room for the night before we head out to the ranch tomorrow. That'll give you time to rest." A hotel room. The word sent ice through Eleanor's veins. Of course there would be a hotel room. They were getting married. That's what husbands and wives did. She must have gone even paler because Caleb frowned. "2 rooms," he said quickly. "I should have been clearer. 2 rooms. We don't have to." He stopped, seeming flustered in a way that was so unexpected Eleanor almost didn't process it. "What I'm trying to say is I don't have expectations about tonight, or any night, until you're ready. If you're ever ready. The marriage is for companionship and help with the ranch, like I wrote. Nothing more unless you want it to be." Eleanor stared at him. "I don't understand." "I'm not a man who forces himself on women, Miss Whitmore. I need a partner, not a prisoner. If that's not what you're looking for, we should know now before we get any further into this arrangement." Her eyes were burning. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of the stranger on a train platform in Denver, but something in her chest had cracked open, and she couldn't quite catch her breath. "I think," she managed, "I would like to get something to eat, if that's still acceptable." Caleb's face softened. "It's more than acceptable." He reached for her carpet bag, then stopped when she flinched. "May I carry your bag? It's no trouble." She nodded jerkily, and he picked it up like it weighed nothing. He didn't offer his arm, didn't try to touch her, just gestured toward the street and started walking at a pace she could match easily. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread that made Eleanor's stomach cramp with sudden hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything that wasn't stale or cold. Caleb pulled out a chair for her, waited until she was seated before taking his own seat across from her. "The stew here is good," he said, "and they make a decent apple pie." A woman appeared beside their table, middle-aged, with flour on her apron and a friendly smile. "Caleb Mercer, you've been away for weeks. Who's this pretty thing?" "My fiancée, Eleanor Whitmore. We're getting married this afternoon." He said it simply, without embarrassment or pride, just a statement of fact. "Eleanor, this is Mrs. Patterson, best cook in Denver." "Oh, how wonderful. Congratulations to you both." Mrs. Patterson beamed at Eleanor with such genuine warmth that Eleanor found herself attempting a smile in return. "What can I get you, dear? You look half-starved." "I'll have whatever's easiest," Eleanor said quietly. "Nonsense, you'll have the stew and fresh bread and pie. Caleb, the usual for you?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson hustled away, and Eleanor found herself alone with Caleb Mercer again. This man she was about to marry, this stranger who looked at her with something that might have been kindness, but could just as easily be a mask for something worse. "You can ask me anything you want," Caleb said. "About the ranch? About me? About what to expect? I know this isn't a normal situation." Eleanor's fingers twisted together in her lap under the table. "Why did you place the advertisement? For a wife, I mean." He leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "The ranch is doing well enough, but it's a lot of work for one person. I've got a small herd, about 50 head of cattle, and I'm looking to expand. Having someone to help with the day-to-day would make that possible." He paused. "And I suppose I got tired of being alone. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. It gets quiet." "You've never been married before?" "No. Came close once, years ago, but she married someone else." He said it without bitterness. "Probably for the best. I wasn't ready then." Mrs. Patterson returned with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of bread. The smell made Eleanor's mouth water despite her nerves. She picked up her spoon with hands that shook slightly. The stew was the best thing she'd tasted in months, rich and savory, with chunks of beef and vegetables and a thick gravy. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry it was hard not to just shovel it down. Caleb ate his own meal in silence, not watching her exactly, but aware of her presence in a way that kept her on edge. When she'd finished most of her bowl, he spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor's stomach clenched. "All right. In your letter you said you were an orphan looking for a new start. That's true, isn't it? You're not running from a husband or family that's going to come looking for you?" The lie formed automatically. "No husband. My parents died 4 years ago. I've been living with relatives since then, but it wasn't a good situation." His eyes went to the fading bruise on her cheek, the one she'd tried so hard to hide. "They hurt you." It wasn't a question. Eleanor's face burned with shame. "It doesn't matter now. I'm leaving it behind." "It matters." Caleb's voice had gone harder, but not directed at her, directed at whoever had left those marks. "I need you to understand something, Eleanor. I'm not going to hit you, not if you burn dinner, not if you make mistakes, not if you sass me or disagree with me. Never. If I ever raise a hand to you, you have my permission to take my horse and whatever money is in the house and leave. Is that clear?" Eleanor's vision blurred. She blinked hard, staring down at her bowl. "Yes. I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry you felt this was your only option." He waited until she looked up at him. "But I'm glad you're here. I think we might do all right together, if you're willing to try." The kindness in his voice was almost worse than cruelty would have been. She could handle cruelty. She'd learned how to survive it, how to make herself small and quiet and invisible. Kindness was dangerous because it made you hope, and hope was the thing that hurt most when it got crushed. "I'm willing to try," she whispered. Mrs. Patterson brought the pie, and Eleanor managed to eat a few bites even though her stomach was in knots again. Caleb paid for the meal. Then they walked back out into the afternoon sunlight. The preacher's office was in a small white church 2 blocks away. Reverend Thompson was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner that reminded Eleanor painfully of her father. He asked them the standard questions. Were they entering this marriage freely? Did they understand the commitment they were making? And Eleanor answered yes to all of them, even though nothing about this felt free. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. There were no guests, no flowers, no music. Just words spoken in a quiet office while March wind rattled the windows. Caleb produced a simple gold band from his pocket and slipped it onto Eleanor's finger with careful precision, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. Eleanor went rigid. Caleb's eyes met hers, and whatever he saw there made him shake his head slightly. "If it's all the same, Reverend, I think we'll save that for later." He turned to Eleanor. "That all right with you, Mrs. Mercer?" Mrs. Mercer. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Yes," she managed. "That's all right." They signed the papers, Reverend Thompson wished them well, and then they were back outside, married. Eleanor stared down at the ring on her finger, this small circle of gold that bound her to a stranger. "The hotel's just down the street," Caleb said. "I'll get us checked in, and then I need to pick up some supplies before we head out tomorrow. You should rest. You look exhausted." Eleanor followed him to a modest hotel, stood silently while he arranged for 2 rooms on the second floor. The desk clerk gave them a knowing look when Caleb requested separate accommodations, but he didn't comment. The room Caleb led her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand and a window overlooking the street. He set her carpetbag down on the bed. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything. Just knock on the wall." He hesitated at the door. "Try to get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Then he was gone, and Eleanor was alone for the first time since she'd stepped off the train. She locked the door with shaking hands, then sank down onto the bed and let herself cry, silent, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for everything she'd lost, everything she'd endured, everything she was terrified of facing. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The same gray eyes stared back, but there was something different now. A ring on her finger. A new name. Mrs. Eleanor Mercer, wife of a Colorado rancher she'd known for less than 3 hours. She didn't know if she'd made a terrible mistake or if she'd just saved her own life. Maybe both were true. Eleanor woke to knocking, her heart slamming into her throat before she remembered where she was. Not Thomas's house. Denver. The hotel. "Eleanor? It's Caleb. I brought you some dinner." She stumbled to the door, unlocked it with fumbling fingers. Caleb stood in the hallway holding a tray with covered dishes. "I thought you might not want to go back out," he said. "But you should eat something." She let him in because she didn't know what else to do. He set the tray on the small table by the window, and the smell of roasted chicken made her stomach cramp with hunger again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's no trouble." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I picked up some things you might need for the ranch. Warmer clothes, boots, a better coat. I had to guess at sizes, but Mrs. Patterson helped me. They're in a package downstairs. We'll grab them in the morning." Eleanor stared at him. "You bought me clothes? You can't wear city dresses on a cattle ranch. You'll freeze and they'll get ruined in the first week." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Consider it a practical investment. I don't have money to pay you back. I'm not asking you to. You're my wife now. What's mine is yours." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "Eat your dinner before it gets cold. I'll knock on your door around dawn. We've got about a 4-hour ride ahead of us." After he left, Eleanor ate the chicken and potatoes mechanically, barely tasting them. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. Why was he being so kind? What did he want from her? When would the other shoe drop? She slept poorly, waking every few hours from half-formed nightmares of Thomas finding her, dragging her back to Boston. When Caleb knocked in the pre-dawn darkness, she was already awake and dressed. The package of clothes was waiting downstairs. Caleb handed it to her, and she changed in a small washroom off the lobby. Practical split skirts, wool shirts, a heavy canvas coat, and sturdy leather boots that fit better than any shoes she'd ever owned. When she emerged, Caleb nodded approval. "Much better. You look like a rancher's wife now." Outside, 2 horses waited at the hitching post. Eleanor stopped short at the sight of them. "I don't know how to ride." Caleb turned to her with surprise. You've never been on a horse? Never. In Boston, she traveled by carriage when she traveled at all, which wasn't often. Thomas preferred to keep her isolated. Well, that's all right. You can ride with me today, and I'll teach you once we're settled at the ranch. He swung up onto the larger of the two horses with easy grace, then extended a hand down to her. Put your foot in the stirrup, and I'll pull you up behind me. Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, her heart hammering. Getting on that horse meant trusting him not to let her fall, meant pressing close to him for hours. I won't drop you, Caleb said quietly. I promise. She took his hand. His grip was strong and warm through her glove, and he lifted her up behind him like she weighed nothing. She settled awkwardly onto the horse's back, trying to figure out where to put her hands. You'll need to hold on, Caleb said. Around my waist is safest. Eleanor's arms trembled as she wrapped them around him. She could feel the solid warmth of his body through his coat, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It was more physical contact than she'd had with another human being in months outside of violence, and it made her skin crawl with instinctive fear, even though he wasn't hurting her. Ready? Caleb asked. Yes. They set off through the awakening streets of Denver, heading west toward the mountains that loomed like giants in the growing light. The second horse followed on a lead rope, carrying their supplies. The first hour passed in silence. Eleanor kept her grip on Caleb's coat, her muscles rigid with tension. But as the miles stretched out and nothing bad happened, he didn't hurt her, didn't make crude comments, didn't even speak unless necessary. She began to relax incrementally. The landscape changed as they climbed, leaving behind the prairie grassland for rolling foothills dotted with pine trees. The air grew thinner and colder. Snow still clung to shaded areas, remnants of winter not quite ready to surrender to spring. We're about halfway, Caleb said around mid-morning. There's a creek ahead where we can stop and rest the horses. The creek was a ribbon of crystal-clear water rushing over smooth stones. Caleb dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down, his hand steadying her when she stumbled on legs gone stiff from riding. Walking will help, he said, and drink some water. The altitude can make you feel strange if you're not used to it. Eleanor knelt by the creek and cupped water in her hands, drinking the icy liquid. It tasted clean in a way Boston water never had. Caleb pulled food from his saddlebags, bread, cheese, dried beef. He handed her a share and they ate standing up, Eleanor too nervous to sit. The ranch is in a valley between two ridges, Caleb said, gesturing toward the mountains ahead. Good grazing land, plenty of water. I've been building it up for 6 years now. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid. You'll have your own room until you decide otherwise. How did you end up in Colorado? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the question. Came west after the war. I grew up in Ohio, worked on farms most of my life. After I came back from fighting, I couldn't settle there again. Too many ghosts. He took a bite of bread, chewing thoughtfully. Heard about opportunities out here for anyone willing to work hard and brave the isolation. Figured I had nothing to lose. Do you have family back east? A brother in Cincinnati. We don't talk much. Something in his voice suggested that was a painful subject, so Eleanor didn't push. They finished eating and got back on the horse. Eleanor's arms went around Caleb's waist with slightly less hesitation this time. The rhythm of the horse's gait had become familiar, almost soothing. The sun was past its zenith when the valley came into view. Eleanor caught her breath at the sight of it. A wide expanse of grassland cradled between tree-covered ridges, with a stream cutting through the middle. In the distance, she could see tiny dark shapes that must be cattle. There, Caleb said, pointing to a structure near the stream. That's home. The house was modest, a single-story log cabin with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Next to it stood a barn and several smaller outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray column. I had my hired hand stay the night to keep the fire going, Caleb explained. That's Marcus. He helps out a few days a week, lives in town with his wife. Good man, keeps to himself mostly. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a lean black man in his 40s who raised a hand in greeting. Caleb returned the gesture and dismounted, then helped Eleanor down. Marcus, this is my wife Eleanor. Eleanor, Marcus Johnson. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he covered his surprise quickly and tipped his hat to her. Ma'am, welcome. Thank you, Eleanor managed. Everything quiet while I was gone? Caleb asked. Quiet as a graveyard. Lost a calf to something, mountain lion probably, but the rest are fine. Your horse threw a shoe yesterday, so I reshod her. Marcus glanced between them with barely concealed curiosity. I'll head back to town now. Let you folks settle in. After Marcus left, Caleb turned to Eleanor. Let me show you inside. The cabin was larger than it had looked from outside, consisting of a main living area with a stone fireplace, a separate bedroom, and a kitchen area along one wall. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, a table with chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves lined with books and supplies. Your room is there, Caleb said, indicating the bedroom. I sleep out here, on the cot by the fireplace. There's a root cellar out back for food storage, and the barn has space for animals if the weather turns bad. Eleanor walked slowly around the space, taking it in. It was rustic compared to Thomas's mansion, but it was warm and clean, and the windows let in golden afternoon light that made everything glow. It's not much, Caleb said, misreading her silence for disappointment. But I can add on more rooms when we have the money. Make it bigger. It's perfect, Eleanor said softly, and meant it. This small cabin in a remote valley felt safer than any grand house ever had. Caleb looked relieved. I'll start bringing in your things and get the horses settled. You should rest. You've had a long couple of days. But Eleanor didn't want to rest. She wanted to do something, needed to feel useful before the anxiety crawling under her skin consumed her completely. What needs doing? She asked. I'd rather work. Caleb studied her for a moment. All right, the chickens need feeding, and there's water to haul from the creek. I can show you where everything is. For the next several hours, Eleanor learned the rhythms of ranch life. The chickens lived in a coop behind the house, 7 hens and a rooster that eyed her suspiciously. Caleb showed her how much feed to scatter, where to check for eggs. The water barrels needed filling from the creek, and he demonstrated how to use the yoke and buckets, though he insisted on carrying the heavier loads himself. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and pink, Caleb started dinner, beans and bacon cooked in a cast-iron pot over the fire, with cornbread baking in a Dutch oven. Eleanor watched him work, this man who moved with easy confidence in his own space. I'm not a fancy cook, he said as he stirred the beans, but I can make basic things. Tomorrow you can take over if you want, or we can share the work. Whatever suits you. They ate at the table, and Eleanor found herself studying him in the firelight. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. His hands were scarred and calloused, but moved with surprising gentleness when he passed her the cornbread. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, catching her staring. Eleanor looked down at her plate. I'm trying to figure you out. Not much to figure. I'm a simple man who likes simple things. Honest work, quiet evenings, land that's mine. He paused. What about you? What do you like? No one had asked her that in years. Eleanor had to think about it. I used to like reading. Before... She stopped. Before? Before my cousin decided it was a waste of time and took my books away. Caleb's jaw tightened. The one who hurt you. Yes. He stood abruptly and went to the bookshelf, returning with 3 volumes. I've got some novels here. They're nothing fancy, but you're welcome to them. And if there are other books you want, I can pick them up next time I go to town. Eleanor took the books with hands that trembled. The titles swam in her vision. Adventure stories, a collection of poetry, a novel she'd never heard of. Thank you. You don't have to thank me for every little thing, Eleanor. This is your home now. What's here is yours as much as mine. After dinner, Caleb cleaned the dishes while Eleanor sat in the rocking chair by the fire, one of the books open in her lap. She couldn't quite focus on the words, too aware of him moving around the cabin, too keyed up from everything that had happened. When full darkness had fallen outside, Caleb banked the fire and stood. I'm going to check on the horses one more time. You should get ready for bed. Morning comes early on a ranch. Eleanor retreated to the bedroom and closed the door. The room was small but private, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. Someone, probably Marcus, had laid a fire in the small stove in the corner, and the room was pleasantly warm. She changed into her nightgown with mechanical movements, then sat on the edge of the bed and waited for her heart to stop racing. Through the door, she could hear Caleb moving around the main room, settling onto his cot. The first night in her new life. Married to a stranger who seemed kind but might not be. Far from everything she'd known, in a wilderness that could kill her if she made mistakes. Eleanor lay down and pulled the quilts up to her chin. Despite her exhaustion, sleep felt impossibly far away. Every sound made her flinch, the wind against the windows, the settling of the house, Caleb shifting on his cot. She waited for him to try her door, waited for the violence she'd learned to expect, waited for the other shoe to drop. but nothing happened. The cabin gradually fell silent except for the crackling of fires and the distant howling of coyotes somewhere in the valley. And eventually, against all odds, Eleanor Mercer slept. Eleanor woke to the sound of someone moving around outside her door, and for a confused moment she thought she was back in Thomas's house, that the past week had been nothing but a fever dream. Then she registered the unfamiliar room, the mountain light coming through the window, and remembered. Colorado. The ranch. Caleb. She dressed quickly in the practical clothes he'd bought her, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. When she emerged from the bedroom, Caleb was at the stove, coiling bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "Morning, coffee's on the table." Eleanor poured herself a cup with shaking hands. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, nothing like the delicate tea Thomas had insisted she serve him every morning at precisely 7 o'clock. She took a sip and nearly choked. Caleb's mouth twitched. "Too strong?" "No, it's fine." She took another sip to prove it, and this time managed not to cough. "What time is it?" "About 5:30. Sun's been up for half an hour already." He flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "I'm heading out to check on the herd after breakfast. You can come with me if you want, start learning the lay of the land. Or you can stay here and get your bearings. Either way is fine." Eleanor sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup for warmth. "I'll come with you." Something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Good. You'll need to learn eventually anyway. Can't run a ranch if you don't know where anything is." They ate quickly. Bacon, eggs, leftover cornbread, and then Caleb led her out to the barn. The morning air was cold enough to make her breath steam, and frost still clung to the grass in shadowed areas. The valley stretched out before them, vast and empty, except for the dark shapes of cattle in the distance. "We'll take the wagon today," Caleb said, hitching up a sturdy-looking mare to a flatbed. "Easier than both of us on horseback until you learn to ride." Eleanor climbed up onto the wagon seat and Caleb settled beside her. He didn't sit too close, she noticed. Left a careful foot of space between them, like he was aware of her constant tension and trying not to make it worse. They rattled across the valley floor, following a track worn into the grass by previous trips. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they went. The creek that ran year-round, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. The line of cottonwood trees that marked the eastern boundary of his property. The rocky outcropping where mountain lions sometimes denned in winter. "You have to watch for predators," he said. "Lions, wolves, bears in the higher elevations. They'll go after calves mostly, but they've been known to attack full-grown cattle if they're hungry enough. I keep a rifle in the barn and another in the house." "Do you know how to shoot?" "No." "I'll teach you that too then. Can't have you defenseless out here." The herd materialized as they drew closer. About 50 cattle scattered across a wide meadow, grazing peacefully. Most were reddish-brown with white faces, sturdy animals built for harsh country. A few calves stuck close to their mothers, their legs still gangly and uncertain. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, and Eleanor followed. He moved among the cattle with easy confidence, checking them over with a practiced eye, running his hands along their flanks and examining their hooves. The animals barely reacted to his presence, used to him. "This is the foundation herd," he said, straightening up from inspecting a calf. "I bought most of them 3 years ago with money I'd saved from working other ranches. Been building from there. If we have a good season, I can buy more breeding stock and really expand the operation." Eleanor watched him work, this man who moved through his world with such certainty. She felt useless standing there, knowing nothing about cattle or ranching or any of this. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Caleb looked at her thoughtfully. "Right now. Just watch and learn. It'll take time before you're comfortable with the animals. Some of them can be temperamental, and I don't want you getting hurt." "I'm not fragile." "Didn't say you were, but a 1,200-pound cow doesn't care how tough you are if she decides to kick." He gestured to a spotted heifer nearby. "Come here, I'll show you how to approach them safely." For the next hour, Caleb taught her the basics. How to read a cow's body language, where to stand so you didn't get trampled or kicked, which animals to avoid because they were mean-spirited by nature. Eleanor tried to absorb it all, but there was so much information and all of it felt foreign. They were heading back to the wagon when one of the calves let out a distressed bawl. Caleb's head snapped around, and he swore under his breath. "Stay here," he said sharply, then took off running toward the sound. Eleanor ignored the instruction and followed, her new boots slipping on the damp grass. She crested a small rise and saw the problem. A calf had gotten itself tangled in old barbed wire hidden in the tall grass, and the more it struggled, the worse the wire cut into its legs. Blood darkened its white fur. Caleb was already kneeling beside the animal, his hands moving carefully to untangle the wire. The calf thrashed and kicked, catching him hard in the shoulder. He grunted but didn't let go. "Easy, easy," he murmured to the terrified animal. "I've got you. Hold still." Eleanor knelt on the calf's other side without thinking. "What can I do?" "Hold his head down if you can. Try to keep him calm." She reached out with trembling hands and gripped the calf's head, pressing it gently but firmly toward the ground. The animal's eye rolled white with fear, and it made pitiful sounds that twisted something in Eleanor's chest. "It's all right," she heard herself saying. "You're all right. We're trying to help." Caleb worked quickly, cutting through the wire with a tool from his belt. The barbs had cut deep in places, and blood soaked into the grass beneath them. Finally, the last strand came free, and the calf lurched to its feet, stumbling away from them on shaky legs toward its mother. Caleb sat back on his heels, breathing hard. His hands were scratched and bleeding from the wire, and there was a rip in his shirt where the calf had kicked him. "You hurt?" Eleanor asked. "Nothing serious." He examined his palms with a grimace. "Stupid of me to leave that old wire out here. I meant to clear it last fall and forgot." "Your hands, they'll be fine." But when he tried to stand, he swayed slightly, and Eleanor saw how pale he'd gone under his tan. "You're not fine," she said, her fear sharpening into something like anger. "Come back to the house. Those cuts need cleaning or they'll fester." Caleb looked like he might argue, but then just nodded. They made their way back to the wagon in silence, and Eleanor took the reins without asking. She'd watched him drive on the way out, and it didn't seem complicated. The horse knew the way home anyway. Back at the cabin, Eleanor made Caleb sit at the table while she heated water and found clean rags. The cuts on his hands were ragged and dirty, embedded with rust from the old wire. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then started cleaning the wounds with firm, efficient movements. She'd done this before, though never on someone else. Thomas had required her to tend her own injuries so no one would see them, and she'd learned how to do it properly. Caleb hissed between his teeth but didn't pull away. "You've done this before." "Yes." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. When his hands were clean and wrapped in bandages, she made him remove his shirt so she could check the shoulder where the calf had kicked him. A massive bruise was already forming, purple-black against his skin. Eleanor pressed carefully around the edges, checking for broken bones the way she'd learned to check herself. "Anything broken?" Caleb asked. "I don't think so, but you should rest it." "Can't rest on a ranch. Too much work." "Then don't do anything that requires heavy lifting for a day or two. Let it heal." She met his eyes, surprised by her own boldness. "Unless you want it to get worse." Something shifted in his expression. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware that she'd been touching his bare skin, that they were alone in the cabin, that she was his wife, and he had every legal right to expect things from her. Her chest tightened with familiar panic. Caleb must have seen it on her face because he stood carefully and reached for his shirt. "Thank you for patching me up. I'm going to rest for a bit like you said. You should eat something. You barely touched breakfast." He retreated to his cot by the fireplace, and Eleanor busied herself in the kitchen area, trying to calm her racing heart. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something had shifted between them. She'd given orders, and he'd followed them. She'd touched him without permission, and he hadn't punished her for it. The rest of the day passed in a strange domestic rhythm. Caleb did rest, reading one of his books by the fire while Eleanor explored the cabin more thoroughly, taking inventory of supplies and learning where everything was kept. Around midday, she made a simple lunch of bread and cheese, and they ate together without much conversation. In the afternoon, Caleb showed her how to milk the cow kept in the barn, a placid older animal named Bessie, who tolerated Eleanor's clumsy attempts with patient indifference. Eleanor's hands ached by the time she'd gotten a half bucket of milk, and Caleb had to finish the job, his bandaged hands making the work awkward. "Takes practice," he said. "You'll get the hang of it." That evening, Eleanor attempted to make dinner and nearly burned the beans before Caleb quietly took over, showing her how to regulate the heat on the stove. They ate the slightly scorched meal without complaint, and afterward, Caleb taught her how to play cards by firelight. Simple games that made her laugh despite herself when she won 3 hands in a row. "You're a natural card sharp," he said, shuffling the deck with his bandaged hands. "I'll have to watch myself." Eleanor smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face. "Maybe I am." When they finally went to bed, Caleb to his cot, Eleanor to her room. She realized she'd gone almost the entire day without being afraid. It came back now in the darkness, the old familiar terror that someone would hurt her, but it was quieter than before, easier to push aside. The days began to blur into a pattern: wake before dawn, breakfast, morning work with the cattle or around the ranch. Lunch, afternoon chores, dinner, quiet evenings by the fire. Caleb was patient with her inexperience, showing her how to do things without making her feel stupid for not knowing. When she made mistakes, and she made many, he just shrugged and helped her fix them. A week into her new life, Marcus came by to help with some fence repairs. He was reserved around Eleanor at first, clearly uncertain what to make of Caleb's sudden marriage, but he warmed up when he saw her struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water from the creek. "Here, ma'am, let me get that," he said, taking it from her hands. "That's too heavy for someone your size." "I can manage," Eleanor protested, but Marcus just smiled. "I'm sure you can, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered." While the men worked on the fence, Eleanor attempted to bake bread using Caleb's mother's recipe that he'd written out for her. The first loaf came out dense as a brick, the second burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. She was near tears of frustration when Caleb came in for lunch and found her staring at the failures. "Well," he said, examining the burnt loaf with exaggerated seriousness, "I suppose we could use this as a doorstop." Eleanor let out a watery laugh despite herself. "I don't understand what I'm doing wrong." "The oven runs hot on the left side. You have to rotate things halfway through or they cook unevenly." He broke off a piece of the less burnt loaf and tasted it. "The flavor's good, though. Just needs practice." "Everything needs practice," Eleanor said, her voice catching. "I don't know how to do anything useful." Caleb set down the bread and looked at her seriously. "That's not true. You've learned more in a week than most people learn in a month. You're trying, Eleanor. That's what matters." "What if I'm not good enough? What if you regret marrying me?" The words came out before she could stop them, her deepest fear laid bare. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I don't regret it," he said finally, "and I won't. You're working hard, you're honest, and you haven't complained once about how difficult everything is. That's more than enough. But I can't even make bread. So you'll learn. We'll learn together." He gestured around the cabin. "I'm not exactly an expert housekeeper, in case you haven't noticed. Half the time I burn dinner, and I've been cooking for myself for years. We're figuring this out as we go, both of us." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her tears. "I'm sorry. Stop apologizing for everything." His voice was gentle but firm. "You haven't done anything wrong." That night, Eleanor lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the cabin. April in the Colorado mountains was unpredictable, warm and sunny one day, snowing the next. Tonight it sounded like a storm was building, and the temperature had dropped sharply after sunset. She was just drifting off when a tremendous crack split the air, followed by a crash that shook the whole cabin. Eleanor bolted upright, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Eleanor!" Caleb's voice came from the main room. "Stay in there!" She heard him moving around, the cabin door opening and then slamming shut. For a long minute, there was nothing but wind and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then Caleb knocked on her door. "You can come out. Tree came down on the porch, but it didn't breach the roof." Eleanor emerged to find Caleb dripping wet, his hair plastered to his head. Through the window, she could see a massive pine trunk blocking most of the porch, its branches scraping against the cabin wall. "Is it safe?" she asked. "For now. I'll have to cut it up and move it in the morning, but it's wedged pretty solid. Won't go anywhere tonight." He was shivering, she noticed. The temperature had dropped so low that his wet clothes were starting to freeze. "You need to get out of those clothes before you catch your death," Eleanor said, slipping back into the familiar role of caretaker. "I'll heat water for tea." "I'm fine. You're turning blue. Don't argue with me." Caleb's eyebrows rose, but he went to change without protest. When he emerged in dry clothes, Eleanor had tea ready and had stoked the fire higher. They sat together, drinking the hot liquid in silence while the storm raged outside. "Does this happen often?" Eleanor asked. "Storms like this?" "Spring storms can be rough in the mountains, usually blow themselves out by morning." He cupped his hands around his mug, still shivering slightly. "Winter's worse, though. I've seen snow 6 feet deep. Temperature so cold you can't go outside without risking frostbite." Eleanor tried to imagine it and couldn't. "How do you manage?" "You prepare, stock up on supplies, make sure the animals are sheltered, keep enough wood split for the stove." He glanced at her. "It'll be easier with 2 of us. Last winter I nearly went crazy from the isolation." How long were you snowed in? About 3 weeks, the worst stretch. Couldn't get to town, couldn't check on the herd properly. Just me and these four walls. He paused. That's when I decided to place the advertisement. Figured even a stranger's company was better than talking to myself. Eleanor absorbed this. And you're not disappointed? That you got me instead of someone more capable? I told you, I don't regret it. Caleb set down his mug and looked at her directly. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. Her stomach clenched. All right. That cousin of yours, the one who hurt you, is there any chance he'll come looking for you? Eleanor's breath caught. She'd been trying not to think about Thomas, trying to pretend that distance made her safe. I don't know. Maybe. He's not the kind of man who likes to lose things he considers his. Did he consider you his? He was my guardian. Legally, I was his responsibility until I married. The words tasted bitter. He liked having that control. Caleb's jaw tightened. If he shows up here, he'll find you have a husband who doesn't take kindly to men who beat women. You understand me? The fierceness in his voice startled her. I understand. Good. He stood, banking the fire for the night. Try to get some sleep. Morning will come soon enough. But Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the storm and thinking about Thomas. Would he look for her? Would he guess where she'd gone? The matrimonial advertisement had been in a Boston newspaper after all. If he thought to check recent editions, if he asked the right questions, she must have dozed eventually because she woke to gray morning light and the sound of an axe biting into wood. Through the window, she could see Caleb attacking the fallen tree with methodical precision, his breath steaming in the cold air. Eleanor dressed quickly and went outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world where every surface glittered with frost. The tree was even larger than she'd thought, its trunk easily 3 feet across. You should let that shoulder rest, she called to Caleb. He paused mid-swing. It's fine, mostly healed. Let me help then. You ever use an axe before? No, but I can learn. Everything needs practice, right? A slow smile spread across his face. Right. Come here, I'll show you. He demonstrated the proper stance, how to grip the axe, where to aim for maximum effect. Then he handed it to Eleanor and she took her first swing. The axe bounced off the wood harmlessly, the impact jarring her arms. Harder, Caleb said. Don't be afraid of it. Commit to the swing. She tried again, putting more force behind it. This time the blade bit into the wood with a satisfying thunk. Better? Keep going. They worked together for the next 2 hours, taking turns with the axe, reducing the massive tree to manageable pieces. Eleanor's arms burned and her hands blistered despite her gloves, but there was something deeply satisfying about the work, about seeing the visible results of her effort. When Marcus arrived around midday, he found them both sweating despite the cold, surrounded by neat stacks of cut wood. Well now, he said, surveying the scene with approval. Looks like you two made quite a team. That tree would have taken me and Caleb most of the day. Eleanor's a quick learner, Caleb said, and the pride in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. Over the following weeks, Eleanor continued to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She got better at milking Bessie, at feeding the chickens, at hauling water and chopping wood. Her bread still came out imperfect more often than not, but it was edible now, and she'd mastered a few simple meals that didn't end in disaster. Caleb taught her to ride on a gentle mare named Willow, patient through Eleanor's initial terror and her tendency to freeze up when the horse moved too quickly. By the end of April, she could manage a slow circuit of the valley without panic, though she still preferred the wagon for longer trips. He also taught her to shoot, starting with an old rifle that didn't kick too hard. Eleanor hated the noise at first, flinching every time she pulled the trigger, but Caleb was relentless in his insistence that she learn. You need to be able to defend yourself, he said after she'd missed the target for the 10th time. What if something happens to me and you're here alone? Nothing's going to happen to you? Maybe not. But out here, you can't afford to assume that. He reset the target. Try again. Breathe out slowly and squeeze. Don't pull. This time the shot hit the edge of the target, and Eleanor felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. They were settling into something that felt almost like partnership. Caleb consulted her about decisions for the ranch, valued her opinions even when she thought they were stupid. When a late freeze threatened the vegetable garden she'd started, they worked together to cover the young plants, racing against dropping temperatures. When Marcus's wife fell ill and he needed time off, Eleanor and Caleb managed the extra work between them without complaint. The only thing they didn't share was a bed. Caleb still slept on his cot by the fireplace, still gave her privacy and space, still never pushed for more than she was willing to give. Sometimes Eleanor caught him looking at her with something that might have been longing, but he always looked away when he realized she'd noticed. It was late May when the thing Eleanor had been dreading finally happened. She was in the barn gathering eggs when she heard a horse approaching. Caleb was out checking fence lines, wasn't due back for hours. Marcus wasn't scheduled to come by. Eleanor's heart started to pound as she crept to the barn door and peered out. A well-dressed man on a fine horse was dismounting in front of the cabin. Even from a distance, even though she'd never seen him before, something about his bearing screamed wealth and authority. He tied his horse to the porch rail and knocked on the cabin door. When no one answered, he tried the door. Found it unlocked, because out here nobody locked their doors. He went inside. Eleanor's whole body went cold. It couldn't be Thomas. This man was too old, too heavy. But he was looking for someone, and she had a terrible suspicion it was her. She should run, should take Willow and ride for the hills, disappear before the stranger could find her. But if she ran, Caleb would come back to questions, maybe danger. She couldn't do that to him. So instead, Eleanor walked toward the cabin on shaking legs, trying to prepare herself for whatever was coming. The man emerged just as she reached the porch steps. Up close, she could see he was in his 50s, with gray shot hair and cold eyes that assessed her like she was livestock. "You must be the girl," he said. No introduction, no pleasantries. "Eleanor Whitmore." "Mercer," she corrected, her voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Eleanor Mercer now." "Ah, yes. The hasty marriage." His lip curled. "Mr. Whitmore hired me to track you down. I'm a private investigator, and I've been following your trail since you left Boston. Took some time, but I found you eventually." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "What does he want?" "For you to come home, of course. You're his ward, his responsibility. Running away was foolish and ungrateful after everything he's done for you. Everything he's done. The bruises, the isolation, the casual cruelty disguised as discipline." Eleanor felt sick. "I'm not going back." "You don't have a choice, girl. You're legally under his guardianship until you turn 25, and this sham marriage doesn't change that." He pulled papers from his coat. "I have a court order demanding your return." "She's not going anywhere." Both Eleanor and the investigator spun around. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands, not pointing at anyone, but the threat was clear. "Mr. Mercer, I presume," the investigator said smoothly. "This doesn't concern you. The girl is my wife, which means it concerns me plenty." Caleb's voice was calm but harder than Eleanor had ever heard it. "And she said she's not going back." "Do you understand the legal consequences of harboring—" "I understand that Eleanor is a grown woman who made a choice to marry me. That makes her my responsibility now, not Thomas Whitmore's." Caleb stepped onto the porch, putting himself between Eleanor and the stranger. "And I know the law well enough to know that marriage emancipates a woman from her guardian's control. So unless you've got different papers than the ones you're waving around, I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out of here." The investigator's face reddened. "Mr. Whitmore will not be pleased. He has resources, connections. Then let him use them. Let him come out here himself if he wants to argue about it. But Eleanor stays here. That's final." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then the investigator shoved the papers back in his coat and stalked to his horse. "You'll regret this," he said, swinging into the saddle. "Both of you." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But it'll be our regret, not yours. Now get off my land." They watched him right away, neither of them moving until he disappeared from view. Then Eleanor's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think he'd find me. I didn't think—" "Hey." Caleb sat down beside her, not touching, but close. "You didn't do anything wrong. That man had no right coming here, threatening you. But what if he comes back? What if Thomas comes? He has money, influence. He could make trouble for you." "Let him try." Caleb's voice was fierce. "You're my wife, Eleanor. That's not some legal technicality to me. It means something. It means I protect you, stand by you, no matter what comes." Eleanor turned to look at him, this man she'd known for barely 2 months, who was offering her safety without asking for anything in return. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." "Maybe I don't owe you, but I—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. "I care about you, Eleanor, more than I probably should after such a short time. And I'll be damned if I let anyone drag you back to a place where you were hurt." Something cracked open in Eleanor's chest, a wall she'd built around her heart to keep the pain contained. She reached out and took Caleb's hand, twining her fingers through his. "Thank you," she said, "for standing up for me. No one's ever done that before." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. Then they were all fools. They sat there on the porch as the sun moved across the valley, hands clasped, neither of them quite ready to let go. And for the first time since Thomas had become her guardian, Eleanor allowed herself to believe she might actually be safe. The investigator's visit changed something between them, though Eleanor couldn't quite name what. That evening, after they'd gone through the motions of dinner and chores with unusual quiet, Caleb built up the fire higher than necessary and poured them both coffee laced with whiskey from a bottle he kept for winter emergencies. "Drink," he said, pressing the cup into her still trembling hands. "It'll help." Eleanor drank, choking on the burn of alcohol cutting through the coffee. "I've never had whiskey before." "Figured." Caleb settled into the rocking chair, his own cup cradled between his palms. "You going to tell me the truth now? About what happened in Boston?" Eleanor's first instinct was to deflect, to offer the same vague explanations she'd been giving for months. But Caleb had stood between her and danger today without hesitation, had risked Thomas's wrath to keep her safe. He deserved better than lies. "My parents died when I was 17, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Consumption took them both within a month of each other. Thomas was my father's cousin, the closest living relative. He took me in, said it was his Christian duty." She took another sip of the whiskey coffee, letting it burn away the tightness in her throat. "At first it was fine. He was distant but not cruel. He gave me a room in his house, made sure I had clothes and food. I thought I was lucky. What changed?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but his knuckles had gone white around his cup. "I grew up, I suppose. Turned 18, then 19. Started to have opinions about things, wanted to go out with friends, asked about attending lectures at the university." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Thomas didn't like that. Said I was becoming willful, disobedient. Said a woman's place was in the home, serving her family, not filling her head with ideas." She could see it all again with painful clarity. The first time Thomas had struck her, his face cold with disappointment, as he explained that he was doing this for her own good, that discipline was an act of love. How she'd believed him at first, thought she'd done something wrong to deserve it. He started restricting what I could do, where I could go. Locked me in my room when he thought I was being difficult. Hit me when I talked back or didn't complete tasks to his satisfaction. The words came faster now, spilling out like poison she needed to expel. It got worse after his fiancée broke their engagement. He blamed me somehow, said I'd embarrassed him in front of her family. After that, it was almost daily. A slap for looking at him wrong, a beating for burning dinner, bruises for asking questions he didn't want to answer. But Caleb had gone very still. "How long did this go on?" 3 years. I tried to leave once, when I was 20, packed a bag and made it as far as the train station before he found me." Eleanor closed her eyes against the memory. "He was so angry. He locked me in the cellar for 2 days with no food or water. After that, I was too afraid to try again." "But you did try again. You got out. I found your advertisement in a newspaper he'd thrown away. It felt like providence, like maybe I had one chance and I had to take it." She looked at Caleb directly. "I lied in my letter to you about my circumstances, about why I wanted to leave. I made it sound like I was just looking for adventure, for a new start. I didn't tell you I was running for my life." "I know," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's breath caught. "You knew?" "Not the details. But I knew you were running from something the moment you stepped off that train looking half dead with terror. I knew when you flinched every time I moved too fast, when you apologized for things that didn't need apologizing for, when you looked at me like you expected me to hit you." He set down his cup and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I knew, Eleanor. And I married you anyway." "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you do that?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I had a sister once, Catherine. She was 2 years younger than me, smart as a whip, prettiest girl in our town." He paused, his jaw working. "She married a man our parents approved of when she was 19. Rich family, good prospects. He seemed like a decent enough fellow." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going. Turned out he wasn't decent at all. Behind closed doors, he was cruel. Hit her, belittled her, kept her isolated from the family. We didn't know for a long time. She hid it well. But I saw bruises at a family dinner one night, asked her about them. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. She lied, said she'd fallen. I knew it wasn't true, but I didn't push. Didn't want to make her uncomfortable. What happened to her? She died 6 months later. Fell down the stairs, her husband said. Broke her neck. Caleb's voice had gone flat, emotionless in a way that told Eleanor he was barely holding himself together. The whole town believed it was an accident, but I knew. I knew he'd killed her, whether he pushed her or just beat her so bad she couldn't stand straight anymore. Eleanor's eyes burned with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. I tried to get justice for her. Went to the sheriff, to the mayor, to anyone who would listen. But her husband was well connected, respected. They called me a grieving brother making wild accusations. Nothing ever came of it. He looked at Eleanor then, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly undid her. So when I saw you step off that train with fear in your eyes and bruises you thought you'd hidden well enough, I knew I couldn't let you go back to that. I couldn't save Catherine, but maybe I could save you. The tears Eleanor had been holding back finally spilled over. You married me out of pity. No. Caleb's voice was fierce. I married you because you were brave enough to escape, because you answered my advertisement with honesty about what you wanted from life, even if you left out the ugly parts, because something in your letter made me think we might understand each other. He stood, crossing to where she sat. The pity came later when I realized just how badly you'd been hurt. But by then it was mixed with respect for your strength, and other things I'm not sure I have the right to feel yet. Eleanor looked up at him through her tears. What other things? Caleb knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. I care about you, Eleanor, more than I planned to, more than might be wise after such a short time. I like having you here. I like working beside you, teaching you things, watching you get stronger and more confident every day. I like the way you laugh when you finally get something right, and the way you argue with me when you think I'm being stubborn, and the way you look in the morning with your hair down and the sun coming through the window. Eleanor's breath had stopped somewhere in her chest. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know you're not ready, might never be ready, and that's all right. I just wanted you to know that what I feel for you isn't obligation or charity. It's real. You're real to me, not some broken thing I'm trying to fix. Eleanor reached out with a shaking hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He went very still under her touch, barely breathing, like he was afraid any movement would startle her away. You scare me, she whispered. Not because I think you'll hurt me, because I'm starting to care about you too, and caring about people means they can hurt you in ways that are worse than fists. I know, trust me, I know. Caleb turned his head slightly, pressing a feather-light kiss to her palm. But I'm willing to risk it if you are. Eleanor didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull back, and pressed her lips to his. It was brief and chaste, barely more than a brush of skin against skin, but it was the first kiss she'd ever given willingly. When she pulled back, Caleb's eyes had gone dark. Eleanor, I'm not ready for more, she said quietly. Not yet, but I want to try, to trust you, to see if this can be more than just a marriage of convenience. We can go as slow as you need, years, if that's what it takes. Caleb stood, pulling her up with him. For now, how about we just sit by the fire and talk? Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with Boston or Thomas or running away. Tell me who you were before all of that. So Eleanor did. She told him about her childhood, about her father who'd been a teacher and her mother who'd played piano, about the books she'd loved, the dreams she'd had of becoming a teacher herself someday, about her friend Sarah who'd died of scarlet fever when they were both 12, and the stray cat she'd kept hidden in the barn until her father found it and let her keep it anyway. Caleb told her about growing up on an Ohio farm, about his brother who'd become a banker and still wrote occasionally with passive-aggressive suggestions that Caleb give up ranching and do something respectable, about learning to ride when he was 4 and breaking his arm falling off a horse when he was 6, about the war and the things he'd seen that still gave him nightmares sometimes. They talked until the fire burned low and Eleanor couldn't stop yawning. When they finally went to bed, still separately, still to their own spaces, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. Like maybe, possibly, she could build something new here, something that wasn't defined by fear. The next few weeks passed in a strange state of heightened awareness. Eleanor found herself watching Caleb more closely, noticing things she'd been too scared to see before. The way his hands moved with such confidence when he worked, the rare smile that transformed his whole face when something pleased him, the patience he showed with her fumbling attempts to learn ranching. She also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, a hunger quickly hidden, a longing he tried to suppress. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel powerful in a way she'd never experienced before. One morning in early June, Eleanor was hanging laundry when Caleb rode up with a package from town. "Mail delivery," he said, dismounting. "Letter from my brother and something for you." "For me?" Eleanor took the small parcel with confusion. She didn't know anyone who would send her things. "It's from a bookstore in Denver. I might have mentioned to the owner that my wife liked reading." Caleb looked pleased with himself. "Open it." Inside were 3 new books, novels she'd mentioned wanting to read in one of their late-night conversations. Eleanor's throat closed up with emotion. "You remembered. I remember everything you tell me." Caleb dismounted and walked over to where she stood, clutching the books. "You looked sad when you said Thomas had taken your books away. Thought maybe I could give you new ones." Eleanor set the books carefully on the porch rail and turned back to Caleb. "Thank you. For this. For everything. I'm not good at saying these things, but you've given me more in 3 months than I had in 3 years with Thomas. You've given me plenty too. This place feels like a home now instead of just somewhere I sleep." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You make it better, Eleanor. Everything's better with you here." Eleanor leaned into his touch without thinking, then caught herself and pulled back. But not as far as she would have a few weeks ago. Progress came in small increments after that. Eleanor started joining Caleb on his cot by the fire in the evenings, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed while they read or talked. She let him take her hand when they walked to check on the cattle, his calloused palm warm against hers. When he came in from working outside and his hands were cold, she warmed them between her own without flinching. It was Marcus who noticed the change first. He came by one afternoon in mid-June to help with some repairs and found them working together in easy companionship, Eleanor handing Caleb tools while he fixed a broken wagon wheel. "You two look settled," Marcus observed, a smile in his voice. "Getting there," Caleb replied, glancing at Eleanor with unmistakable affection. After Marcus left, Eleanor worked up the courage to ask something that had been bothering her. "Do people in town talk about us? About our marriage?" Caleb set down the wrench he'd been using. "Probably. It's a small town. People talk about everything. Does it bother you?" "I don't know. I guess I wonder what they say." "Marcus says most folks think it's a good match, that you seem happy here." He paused. "Are you? Happy, I mean?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. A few months ago, happiness had seemed like something that happened to other people, not to her. Now it felt tentatively possible. "I'm getting there too," she said finally, echoing his earlier words. "It's strange learning how to be happy. I'm not sure I know how anymore." "We'll figure it out together," Caleb said, and pulled her into a brief, careful hug that she actually leaned into instead of tolerating. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to Caleb's breathing in the next room and thinking about everything that had changed. About how she no longer flinched when he came near her, how his presence had become comforting instead of threatening, how she'd started to crave his touch instead of fear it. She also thought about the bedroom they didn't share, about the invisible line they'd drawn and maintained. Caleb had been so patient, never pushing, always waiting for her to be ready. But when would she be ready? How would she even know? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. She was ready now, or at least ready to try. Before she could second-guess herself, Eleanor got up and padded into the main room. The fire had burned down to coals, casting everything in dim orange light. Caleb was asleep on his cot, one arm flung over his head. "Caleb," she whispered. He came awake instantly, years of ranch life making him a light sleeper. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly uncertain. "Can we talk?" Caleb sat up, scrubbing a hand over his face. "Of course. Let me get the fire going." He coaxed the coals back to life while Eleanor settled into the rocking chair. When he turned back to her, she saw concern in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I've been thinking about us, about our marriage." Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes. "You've been so patient with me. never asking for more than I could give. But we're husband and wife, Caleb, and I want to try to be a real wife to you." Caleb went very still. "Eleanor, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's the point." She twisted her hands together. "With Thomas, everything was forced. He took what he wanted without caring how I felt. But with you, I actually have a choice. And I'm choosing to try. If you still want—" "If I still want?" Caleb crossed to her in 3 long strides, kneeling beside the chair. "Eleanor, I've wanted you since the day you smiled at me over that terrible first loaf of bread. But I need you to be sure. Really sure. Not doing this because you think you owe me or because you think it's expected. I'm sure." And she was. Terrified, yes, but also certain in a way she hadn't been about anything in years. "I trust you, Caleb. I know you won't hurt me." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I won't. I swear I won't. But if you need me to stop at any point, you just say so. We go at your pace, understand?" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." She let him lead her to the bedroom, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Inside, Caleb lit the lamp on the dresser, keeping the light low. "We don't have to do anything tonight except sleep in the same bed," he said quietly. "Just being close. That's enough, if that's all you want." But Eleanor didn't want to wait anymore. She'd spent too long being afraid, too long letting Thomas's cruelty dictate how she lived. It was time to take back that part of herself. "I want more," she whispered. What followed was nothing like what Eleanor had feared. Caleb was patient and careful, checking in with her constantly, stopping the moment she tensed up. When he kissed her, it was soft and questioning, waiting for her to respond before deepening it. When he touched her, his hands were gentle, reverent even, like she was something precious. There was awkwardness. Neither of them had much experience, and Eleanor's fear kept reasserting itself at unexpected moments. But Caleb talked her through it, made her laugh when the tension got too intense, reminded her over and over that they could stop whenever she wanted. In the end, it wasn't perfect. It hurt more than Eleanor had expected, and she cried partway through from a mixture of emotion and overwhelm. But Caleb held her through it, kissed away her tears, and stayed with her afterward instead of rolling away like she'd half expected. "You all right?" he murmured against her hair. "I think so." Eleanor was shaking, but not from fear this time. It was different than I thought it would be. Good different or bad different? Good. Strange, but good. She turned in his arms to look at him. "Thank you for being patient with me." "Always." Caleb kissed her forehead. "We've got the rest of our lives to figure this out. No rush." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Eleanor woke in the night from a half-formed nightmare, Caleb was right there, solid and warm, chasing away the shadows with his presence. The next morning felt different. Eleanor expected things to be awkward between them, but instead there was an ease that hadn't existed before. Caleb smiled at her over breakfast with unmistakable warmth, and when she passed close to him to get the coffee pot, he caught her around the waist and pulled her in for a quick kiss that made her blush and laugh. "I could get used to this," she said. "Good, because I'm planning to keep doing it." Over the following weeks, they settled into their new dynamic. Eleanor moved into the bedroom properly, and Caleb converted his cot area into a workspace for the ranch accounts. They learned each other's bodies and rhythms, figured out what worked and what didn't, grew comfortable with the physical intimacy that had seemed so impossible months ago. But it wasn't just the physical relationship that deepened. Eleanor found herself sharing things with Caleb she'd never told anyone. Her fears and hopes, her dreams for the future, the small daily observations that seemed too trivial to matter, but that he listened to with genuine interest. And he opened up to her in return, telling her about his struggles to make the ranch profitable, his worries about weather and cattle prices, his quiet pride in what they were building together. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Caleb said something that made Eleanor's heart skip. "I love you." She turned to stare at him. "What?" "I love you," he repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. "I've been trying to figure out the right time to say it, but I don't think there is a right time, so I'm just saying it now. I love you, Eleanor. The way you've fought to heal yourself, the strength you show every day, the person you're becoming out here. I love all of it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I know how to love properly. Thomas twisted everything so much. Thomas was a bastard who didn't deserve you." What he did to you wasn't love, it was control and cruelty. This is love. Caleb gestured between them. What we have here, the choosing each other every day, the working through hard things together, the caring about each other's happiness, that's real. I think I love you too, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. I'm scared to say it, scared that admitting it makes it real, and real things can be taken away. But yes, I love you, Caleb Mercer. You saved my life in more ways than one. He pulled her close, and they sat like that as the sun painted the valley in shades of gold and orange, two damaged people who'd found something whole in each other. But their peace didn't last. In early August, Marcus arrived at the ranch with news that made Eleanor's blood run cold. There's a man in town asking questions about you, he said without preamble. Showed up yesterday at the general store, flashing money around, wanting to know about Caleb Mercer and his new wife. What did people tell him? Caleb's voice had gone hard. Not much. Most folks don't cotton to strangers poking into private business, but he's persistent, and he's got money to loosen tongues. Marcus looked at Eleanor apologetically. He matches the description of that investigator who came here in May. Could be he's back, or could be someone else from Boston. Thomas, Eleanor whispered. He sent someone else. He's not going to stop. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders. Then we'll deal with whoever comes, same as before. But Eleanor shook her head. You don't understand. Thomas doesn't give up. If threats don't work, he'll try something else. He'll find a way to hurt you to get to me. Let him try. Caleb's voice was steel. I meant what I said, Eleanor. You're my wife. That means something out here, and I'll defend it. We should get the sheriff involved, Marcus suggested. Let him know what's going on. Make it official that Eleanor's here by choice, and anyone trying to take her is breaking the law. Caleb nodded slowly. That's not a bad idea. Tomorrow we'll ride into town and talk to Sheriff Morrison. In the meantime, Marcus, can you spread the word? If anyone else comes asking questions, they should be told to talk to us directly. After Marcus left, Eleanor couldn't settle. She paced the cabin, her old anxieties flooding back with a vengeance. What if he sends men to just take me? What if he hurts you? What if... Caleb caught her mid-pace, his hands on her shoulders. Stop. You're spiraling. I have good reason to spiral. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me. Caleb guided her to sit. Tell me everything, so I know what we're up against. So Eleanor did. She told him about Thomas's connections in Boston, about the judge who was his personal friend, about the politician who owed him favors, about how Thomas saw the world, how in his mind people were either useful or obstacles, and obstacles needed to be removed. He won't come himself, she said. He'll send men, probably claim I'm mentally unfit or that you coerced me into marriage. He'll make it look legal, respectable, while destroying everything I've built here. Caleb listened to it all without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He sounds like the kind of man who's never been told no, he said finally, who's used to getting his way through money and influence. Yes. Well, he's about to learn that none of that matters out here. This isn't Boston. This is Colorado territory, and things work differently. Caleb stood, crossing to the gun cabinet. But we're not taking chances. From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. If I'm out with the herd, you stay close to the house with the rifle loaded, and we get that sheriff involved immediately. The next morning, they rode into town together. Sheriff Morrison was a grizzled man in his 60s who'd been enforcing law in the territory for decades. He listened to their story with thoughtful attention, occasionally scratching notes on a piece of paper. So this cousin of yours, he's claiming guardianship even though you're married, Morrison asked Eleanor. Yes, sir. Or he was. I don't know what he's claiming now. Well, the law's pretty clear. Marriage emancipates a woman from her guardian's control, especially at your age. You're 22, you said. Yes. Then legally, Thomas Whitmore has no claim on you whatsoever. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Now, that doesn't mean he won't try something underhanded. Rich Eastern men sometimes think they can buy their way around frontier law. But I'll make sure everyone knows the situation. If anyone tries to take you by force or claims to have legal authority, they'll be arrested for kidnapping. Some of the tension eased from Eleanor's shoulders. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. Best thing you can do is stay vigilant. Keep that rifle close and don't trust strangers. Morrison looked at Caleb. You got enough hands at the ranch to keep watch? Just Marcus a few days a week, but I can manage. Might want to hire on another hand or two, just temporarily. Having more people around makes you less of an easy target. They left the sheriff's office with a plan in place, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. The other shoe, finally dropping. She wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, on a sweltering August afternoon, 3 men rode up to the ranch. Eleanor saw them coming from the kitchen window, and her blood turned to ice. The man in the center was Thomas Whitmore himself. Eleanor's hands went numb, the dish she'd been washing slipping from her fingers and shattering in the basin. Through the window, she watched Thomas dismount with the casual grace of a man who'd never doubted his right to go wherever he pleased. The 2 men flanking him looked like hired muscle dressed up in respectable clothes, their eyes scanning the property with professional assessment. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. 3 years of terror came flooding back in a single moment, turning her legs to water and her mind to static. "Eleanor?" Caleb's voice came from the doorway. He'd been in the barn. "What's—" He saw her face and crossed the room in 2 strides, following her frozen stare out the window. His whole body went rigid. "Get the rifle," he said quietly, "then go to the bedroom and lock the door." "No." The word scraped out of Eleanor's throat. "No, if I hide, he wins. He's here because of me. I have to face him." "Eleanor, I have to." She turned to look at Caleb, saw the fear and fury warring in his expression. "But I need you beside me, please." Caleb pulled her against him for one fierce moment. "All right, but you stay behind me, and if things go bad, you run. You take Willow and you ride to Marcus's place and you don't look back, understand?" Eleanor nodded against his chest, even though she knew she'd never be able to do it. She wouldn't leave him to face Thomas alone. They went out onto the porch together just as Thomas reached the bottom step. Up close, he looked exactly as Eleanor remembered, impeccably dressed despite the long journey, his iron gray hair perfectly combed, his cold blue eyes assessing everything with the calculating precision of a man used to finding weaknesses. "Eleanor." His voice was smooth, cultured, completely devoid of warmth. "You've led me on quite a chase." "Mr. Whitmore." Caleb stepped slightly in front of Eleanor, his body language protective without being overtly aggressive. "You're on my property. State your business or leave." Thomas's gaze flickered to Caleb with barely concealed disdain. "Your property? How quaint." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "I have a court order from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts demanding the return of my ward, Eleanor Whitmore, who was taken from my care under fraudulent circumstances." "Eleanor Mercer," Caleb corrected, his voice hard. "And she wasn't taken from anywhere. She chose to leave, chose to marry me, and chose to stay here. All legal, all proper." "Legal?" Thomas's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You call seducing a vulnerable young woman through fraudulent correspondence legal? You exploited her desperate circumstances for your own gain, sir. That marriage is invalid, and I have documentation to prove it." Eleanor felt Caleb tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped out from behind him. "He didn't seduce me, Thomas. I answered his advertisement of my own free will. And the only fraudulent thing about our marriage is whatever lies you've manufactured to justify coming here." Thomas's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Eleanor, look at you. Living in squalor, working like a common laborer. This is what you chose over the life I provided? Over your proper place in society? My proper place was cowering in a locked room, waiting for you to decide whether to feed me or beat me that day." Eleanor's voice shook, but held. "You call this squalor. I call it freedom." Something dangerous flickered across Thomas's face. "Watch your tongue, girl. You're confused, traumatized from this man's manipulation. That's why I've brought Dr. Hendricks." He gestured to one of the men beside him, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who stepped forward with professional sympathy. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Dr. Samuel Hendricks from Boston General Hospital. Your cousin has expressed concern about your mental state. These delusions you're experiencing, this belief that he mistreated you, they're symptoms of hysteria, quite common in young women, but treatable, with proper care in a therapeutic environment." "I'm not hysterical," Eleanor said, ice forming in her stomach. This was exactly what she'd feared, Thomas using his connections to paint her as mentally unfit, to justify taking her back against her will. "And my name is Eleanor Mercer. I'm not delusional, and I'm not going anywhere with you." "Mrs. Mercer is under no obligation to speak with you," Caleb interjected. "And that court order from Massachusetts means nothing in Colorado territory. Sheriff Morrison has already been informed of the situation, and he's made it clear that any attempt to remove Mrs. Mercer by force will be treated as kidnapping. Thomas's expression hardened. How very territorial. Tell me, Mr. Mercer, what did you promise Eleanor to get her to marry you? What lies did you tell a frightened, abused girl to convince her you were her savior? I promised her honesty, safety, and a partnership. That's all. Honesty? Thomas pulled another document from his coat. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you failed to mention in your matrimonial advertisement that you're deeply in debt, that this ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, that you're one bad season away from losing everything? Caleb went very still. Eleanor looked at him sharply, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. That true? She asked quietly. There's debt, yes. Most ranchers carry some debt, but I'm managing it. Managing it? Thomas's voice dripped with false concern. According to the bank records I obtained, you're 3 months behind on payments. You married Eleanor not for companionship, but for free labor and whatever money you thought she might have. You're no better than I am, Mr. Mercer. You're just better at hiding it. That's a damned lie, Caleb started, but Eleanor held up her hand. Why are you really here, Thomas? She asked. You never cared about my well-being when I was living under your roof. Why travel all this way, spend all this money, if not to make me suffer more? Thomas's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury beneath. You embarrassed me, Eleanor. You made me look like a fool in front of Boston society, made people question my ability to manage my own household. Do you have any idea the damage you've done to my reputation? So this is about your pride. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to a clear, cold anger. You beat me for 3 years because I wasn't obedient enough, and now you're angry because I escaped. Well, I'm not coming back. You can take your court orders and your bought doctor and leave. I'm not leaving without you. Thomas's voice went flat and hard in a way Eleanor recognized all too well. One way or another, you're coming back to Boston. Either you come willingly and I'll be lenient, or you come by force and face consequences you can't imagine. The third man, who'd been silent until now, moved his coat aside slightly to reveal a holstered pistol. Caleb saw it and shifted position, putting himself more directly between Eleanor and the threat. You're threatening us now? Caleb's voice had gone quiet and dangerous. On my own land? I'm stating facts, Thomas said. You're an insignificant rancher in the middle of nowhere with no real resources or connections. I have lawyers, judges, politicians in my pocket. I can make your life very difficult, Mr. Mercer. Or I can make this easy. Return Eleanor to my care, accept this compensation for your trouble. He pulled out a bank draft, and we all walk away satisfied. I'm not a horse you can buy back, Eleanor said, her voice shaking with rage now instead of fear. I'm a person, a grown woman who made her own choices, and you have no power over me anymore. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Dr. Hendricks, please note for your official report that the patient is exhibiting severe agitation and delusional thinking. She genuinely believes she has agency in this situation, which clearly demonstrates the extent of her mental deterioration. You bastard, Eleanor breathed. You're going to have me committed. That's your plan. It's for your own good, dear cousin. The wilds of Colorado have clearly damaged your fragile mind, but with proper treatment at the asylum in Boston, you'll recover. Might take months, possibly years, but eventually you'll be grateful I saved you from this squalor. The world seemed to tilt. An asylum. He was going to lock her away, drug her into compliance, keep her imprisoned indefinitely under the guise of medical care. It was worse than anything she'd imagined. Over my dead body, Caleb said, and there was nothing civilized left in his voice. Thomas smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. That can be arranged as well, Mr. Mercer. I hear ranching is dangerous work. Accidents happen all the time. The armed man's hand moved closer to his pistol. Eleanor saw it happening in slow motion, saw the violence about to unfold, saw the choice she had to make. She could let Caleb fight her battle and possibly die for it, or she could surrender and at least keep him alive. Wait, the word tore out of her. Wait. If I go with you. If I come back to Boston voluntarily, you leave Caleb alone. You don't hurt him. Don't try to ruin him financially. Nothing. Eleanor, no. Caleb grabbed her arm. That's acceptable, Thomas said smoothly. Give me your word you'll come peacefully, and Mr. Mercer can return to his failing ranch unmolested. Eleanor looked at Caleb, memorizing his face, the fear and fury and desperate love written all over it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I can't let him kill you. I can't. Don't do this. Caleb's grip tightened on her arm. We'll fight him together. We'll get the sheriff. There isn't time. You saw that gun. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I love you. Remember that, no matter what happens. I love you, and you saved me, even if it's only for a little while. She started to step off the porch, but Caleb yanked her back against him, his arm like an iron band around her waist. No, he said flatly. You're not going. I don't care what threats he makes. I won't let him take you. How touching, Thomas said dryly. But ultimately pointless. Rogers, if you would... The armed man reached for his pistol, and Caleb shoved Eleanor behind him, reaching for his own weapon. Everything happened at once. Rogers drawing, Caleb pulling his gun, Eleanor screaming, Thomas stepping back with calculated calm. The shot that rang out didn't come from any of them. Rogers dropped his pistol with a yelp, clutching his hand where blood bloomed through his fingers. On the ridge above the ranch, Marcus stood with a rifle, and beside him were Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies. Drop the weapon, Morrison called out, starting down the slope with his men. All of you, stay right where you are. Thomas's face went through several rapid transformations: surprise, anger, calculation. By the time the sheriff reached them, he'd settled on righteous indignation. Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man, he pointed at Caleb, has been holding my ward against her will, and when I attempted to retrieve her, his associate shot my man without provocation. That's interesting, Morrison said, his weathered face unreadable. Because what I saw from up on that ridge was your man drawing on an unarmed couple on their own property. That's assault at minimum, attempted murder if I'm feeling uncharitable. He turned to Rogers, who was still clutching his bleeding hand. You'll want Doc Patterson to look at that. Deputy Clark, escort this gentleman to town and make sure he gets medical attention. Then lock him up for attempted assault. You can't, Thomas started. I can, and I am. Morrison's voice hardened. We do things different out here, Mr. Whitmore. You might have fancy lawyers and court orders back east, but in Colorado territory, we take a dim view of men who threaten women and brandish weapons on other folks' land. I have legal documentation. Let me see it. Thomas handed over the court order with barely concealed fury. Morrison read it slowly, then looked at Dr. Hendricks. You a real doctor? Of course I am. I'm a respected physician in Boston. And you're prepared to testify that Mrs. Mercer is mentally incompetent based on what, exactly? You've been on this property all of 5 minutes. Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Whitmore provided extensive documentation of her condition. Documentation he wrote himself, I'm guessing. Morrison handed the papers back to Thomas. This order isn't worth the paper it's printed on in Colorado. Mrs. Mercer is a legal adult who entered into lawful marriage. Her husband is standing right here saying she's competent and present of her own free will. Unless you've got the president himself signing off on kidnapping her across state lines, you've got no authority here. I'll appeal to the territorial governor, Thomas said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I'll make such trouble for this backwater excuse for law enforcement that... You do that, Morrison interrupted. In the meantime, you're going to get on your horses and ride back to Denver, and you're going to leave the Mercers alone. If I see you on their property again without a proper warrant from a Colorado court, I'll arrest you myself for trespassing and harassment. We clear? Thomas looked at Eleanor with such venom that she took an involuntary step back. This isn't over, dear cousin. You may think you've won, but I promise you. That sounded like a threat, Mr. Whitmore. Morrison's hand moved to his own pistol. Want to rethink that statement? For a long moment, Thomas just stared at Eleanor. Then he turned on his heel and stalked toward his horse. Dr. Hendricks followed, looking relieved to be leaving. I'll be watching you both, Thomas said as he mounted. Any misstep, any scandal, anything I can use, I'll be waiting. Then he spurred his horse and rode off, leaving only Dust and the deputy escorting the injured Rogers toward town. Eleanor's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Caleb hadn't caught her, holding her up while she shook so hard her teeth rattled. It's all right, he murmured into her hair. He's gone. You're safe. I've got you. How did you know? Eleanor asked Morrison through chattering teeth. How did you know to come? Marcus here sent word this morning that strangers were asking after you in town, matching the description of your cousin. Figured I'd better ride out and check on things. Morrison's expression softened slightly. You all right, Mrs. Mercer? I don't know, Eleanor said honestly. He was going to take me. He was going to lock me in an asylum and... Her voice broke. Caleb pulled her closer, his own hand shaking now that the danger had passed. Morrison cleared his throat. I'll file a report about what happened here. Get it on record. If Whitmore tries anything else, we'll have documentation. In the meantime, I'd suggest you both stay alert. Men like that don't give up easy. After the sheriff and his deputies left, Marcus came down from the ridge, his rifle still in his hands. "That was some shooting," Caleb said roughly. "Thank you." "Couldn't let him draw on you." Marcus looked at Eleanor with concern. "You sure you're all right, ma'am?" "I will be." Eleanor tried to smile and failed. Eventually, Marcus helped them move through the rest of the day in a haze. Eleanor couldn't stop shaking, couldn't focus on anything. Thomas's face kept appearing in her mind, that cold promise of retribution. Caleb stayed close, touching her shoulder or hand every few minutes like he needed to reassure himself she was still there. That night, after Marcus had gone home and they were alone in the cabin, Eleanor broke down completely. Great racking sobs that tore out of her chest, months of fear and tension finally finding release. Caleb held her through it, rocking her gently, not trying to fix it or make it stop. "I almost left with him," she gasped between sobs. "I was going to go back just to keep you safe. I know. And I would never have forgiven myself if you had." Caleb's voice was rough. "When I saw you stepping toward him, when I realized you were going to sacrifice yourself, Eleanor, I can't lose you. I can't. You almost did. If Marcus and the sheriff hadn't come, but they did. We're all right. We're safe. For now." Eleanor pulled back to look at him, tears still streaming down her face. "You heard what he said. He's going to keep coming after us, keep trying to destroy what we've built here. And the things he said about your debt, is that true? Are you about to lose the ranch?" Caleb's face closed off. "It's complicated." "Don't." Eleanor grabbed his shirt. "Don't shut me out now. We're supposed to be partners, remember? Tell me the truth." He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "I'm 3 months behind on the mortgage. Had a bad season last year, lost some cattle to disease and predators, and I haven't recovered. I was hoping this year would be better, that I could catch up, but then you spent money on train fare for me, on clothes and supplies." Eleanor felt sick. "I've been another expense you couldn't afford." "No!" Caleb's voice was fierce. "Don't even think that. You're not an expense, you're my wife. And yes, things are tight financially, but we'll figure it out. We always do." "How much do you owe?" "Eleanor?" "How much?" Caleb named a figure that made Eleanor's stomach drop. It was more than she'd imagined, more than they could possibly earn from one season's cattle sales. "What happens if you can't pay?" she asked quietly. "The bank forecloses, they take the ranch, sell the land and cattle to cover the debt. We'd have nothing. Where would we go?" "I don't know. Find work somewhere, I suppose. Start over." But the defeat in his voice told Eleanor how much that idea cost him. This ranch was everything to Caleb, his dream, his purpose, his home. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. Her mind was racing, turning over possibilities, trying to find a solution to the impossible situation they were in. "There has to be something we can do," she said. "Some way to earn enough money to catch up on payments." "In 3 months?" "Eleanor, be realistic. Even if we sold every head of cattle I own, it wouldn't be enough. And then we'd have nothing to rebuild with." "What about taking out another loan? No bank is going to lend to someone who's already in default." Caleb rubbed his face tiredly. "I've thought about this from every angle. Trust me. There's no good solution." Eleanor stopped pacing, an idea forming. A terrible idea that made her feel sick even considering it, but possibly their only option. "What if I went back?" she said quietly. Caleb's head snapped up. "What?" "To Boston. Not to Thomas, but to the house. There are things there that belong to my parents, jewelry and silver that Thomas kept after they died. Legally, it should have come to me. If I could get to it, sell it." "Absolutely not." Caleb was on his feet now. "You are not going back to Boston, not anywhere near that man. I won't even consider it." "But if it could save the ranch." "I don't care." The words came out louder than Caleb probably intended. He took a breath, visibly trying to control himself. "I don't care about the ranch if the cost is putting you in danger. We'll lose everything. We'll start over somewhere else, but I'm not sending you back into Thomas Whitmore's reach." End of discussion. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she could see the terror in Caleb's eyes, the absolute refusal to even consider the possibility. She let it drop, but the idea didn't leave her mind. Over the next few weeks, they tried to move on. Caleb worked longer hours, pushed himself harder, trying to increase their profits through sheer force of will. Eleanor took over more of the ranch work, learning to handle the cattle with increasing confidence, to ride well enough to help with the herding. They were careful not to talk about money, about Thomas, about the future that felt increasingly uncertain, but the stress was there in the set of Caleb's shoulders, in the way Eleanor jolted awake from nightmares, in the silences that stretched between them. It was late September when Eleanor realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She counted backward twice, then a third time, each count bringing the same impossible result. 6 weeks. She was 6 weeks late, and she was never late. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to process what this meant. A baby. She was almost certainly carrying Caleb's child. The timing couldn't be worse. They were drowning in debt, under threat from Thomas, possibly about to lose everything they had. Bringing a child into this chaos seemed irresponsible at best, disastrous at worst. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else, a fierce, protective joy that took her completely by surprise. A baby. Their baby. Proof that something good and whole could come from the wreckage of her old life. She didn't tell Caleb right away. She wanted to be sure, wanted to wait until she could think clearly about what it meant. But her body betrayed her a week later when the smell of bacon cooking made her bolt from the bed and lose what little was in her stomach. Caleb found her on the porch afterward, pale and shaking. "You sick?" he asked, concern written all over his face. "Should I ride for the doctor?" No, doctor." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I'm not sick. I'm pregnant." Caleb froze. "You're what?" "Pregnant. I think about 2 months along, maybe a little less." She couldn't read his expression. "Are you angry?" "Angry?" Caleb sat down heavily beside her. No, I'm not angry. I'm terrified and confused," and he stopped, running his hands through his hair. "A baby. We're having a baby. I know the timing is terrible. The timing is always terrible for something like this. There's never a perfect moment." Caleb turned to look at her, and despite everything, there was wonder in his eyes. "But we're having a baby, Eleanor. That's incredible. You're not upset? Even with everything else going on?" "I'm a lot of things right now, but upset isn't one of them." He reached out tentatively and placed his hand on her stomach. "This is ours. Something good in the middle of all the bad. How could I be upset about that?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so afraid you'd see it as another burden we can't afford." "Never. You hear me? This baby is never a burden." Caleb pulled her against him. "We'll figure the rest out. Somehow." But figuring it out proved harder than determination alone could solve. The bank sent notice in October that if payment wasn't received by the end of November, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Caleb met with them twice, trying to negotiate an extension, but they were unmoved. "It's not personal," the banker explained with professional sympathy. "But we have our own obligations. 3 months past due is our limit." Eleanor watched Caleb retreat further into himself after that meeting, saw him working from before dawn until after dark, driving himself to exhaustion, trying to save something that was already slipping through their fingers. She tried to help, but the pregnancy had brought waves of fatigue that left her dizzy and weak. In early November, Eleanor woke to find Caleb gone, and a note on the table saying he'd ridden to Denver to try one last time to secure a loan from a different bank. She was supposed to stay home and rest, the note said. Marcus would check on her later, but Marcus didn't come. And as the day wore on with no sign of Caleb, Eleanor's unease grew into full-blown anxiety. When darkness fell and he still hadn't returned, she knew something was wrong. Caleb would never stay overnight in Denver without getting word to her somehow, which meant either something had happened to him or Thomas had made his move. Eleanor spent a sleepless night pacing the cabin with the rifle in her hands, starting at every sound. At first light, she was saddling Willow when Marcus finally arrived, his face grim. "Mrs. Mercer, you need to come with me. There's been trouble in town." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Caleb? He's alive, but he's hurt. There was a fight at the saloon last night. Some men jumped him, said he owed them money from a card game, but..." Marcus shook his head. "It was orchestrated, ma'am. I'd bet my life on it. Your cousin's doing." Eleanor didn't wait to hear more. She climbed onto Willow and kicked her into a gallop, leaving Marcus to follow. The ride to town usually took an hour. She made it in 40 minutes, pushing the mare harder than she should have. She found Caleb at Doc Patterson's office, sitting on an examination table with his shirt off, revealing a landscape of bruises across his ribs and back. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, and there was a gash across his cheekbone that had been stitched closed. "Eleanor." His voice was rough. "You shouldn't be here. You should be resting." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him as carefully as she could, mindful of his injuries. "Don't you dare tell me to rest when you look like this." "What happened?" "3 men cornered me in the alley behind the saloon, said I owed them money, started beating me before I could explain I'd never played cards with them in my life." Caleb winced as he shifted position. "If the sheriff hadn't heard the commotion and broken it up, they might have killed me." "Thomas sent them," Eleanor said flatly. "This is his way of punishing us without getting his own hands dirty." "That's what I figure too, but I can't prove it, and the men claim they don't know anyone named Whitmore." Caleb's good eye fixed on her. "He's escalating, Eleanor. It's not enough to threaten us anymore. He wants to hurt us, destroy us completely." Doc Patterson cleared his throat from the doorway. "Nothing broken, fortunately, but you're going to be sore for weeks. Keep those ribs wrapped and don't do any heavy lifting until the bruising fades." "I'm a rancher, Doc. Heavy lifting is the job." "Then find someone else to do it for a while, or you'll make the injury worse." Patterson's eyes moved to Eleanor. "And you, young lady, should not be riding horses in your condition. You want to risk that baby?" Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "I had to know he was all right." "Well, now you know, both of you. Get some rest. And Caleb, I mean it about no heavy work. Marcus can handle things for a while." The ride back to the ranch was quiet and tense. Caleb could barely sit upright in the saddle, and Eleanor kept looking over at him, terrified he'd fall. When they finally made it home, she helped him inside and into bed over his weak protests. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're beaten half to death because of me." Eleanor's voice cracked. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't run away, if I'd just stayed in Boston, then you'd be in an asylum or dead by now, and I'd still be alone in this cabin wishing I had the courage to place that advertisement." Caleb caught her hand. "None of this is your fault, Eleanor. Thomas Whitmore is a monster, and what he does is on him, not you." "But he's winning." The words tasted like ash. "He's going to keep hurting you until I break, until I give up and go back. And now with the baby coming, with the ranch about to be foreclosed, I don't see how we win this." "We don't give up," Caleb said fiercely. "That's how we win. We hold on. We fight. We refuse to let him destroy what we've built." But even as he said it, Eleanor could see the doubt in his eyes, could see that he was running out of ideas, out of options, out of hope. That night, while Caleb slept fitfully from the laudanum Doc Patterson had given him for the pain, Eleanor sat at the table and made a decision. She wrote 2 letters by candlelight, one to Caleb, one to the bank. Then she packed a small bag with the essentials and counted out what little money they had saved. It wasn't enough for a train ticket all the way to Boston, but it would get her part way. She'd figure out the rest as she went. She was going back, not to surrender to Thomas, but to get what was rightfully hers, her parents' jewelry and valuables that Thomas had stolen. Enough to pay off Caleb's debt and save the ranch. Enough to give their child a secure future. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal. Thomas would be watching for her, waiting. But Eleanor had learned a few things in her months on the ranch. She'd learned to be brave, to fight back, to protect what mattered. And what mattered most was making sure Caleb and their baby had a home to come back to. She kissed Caleb's forehead gently, careful not to wake him, and whispered against his skin, "I love you. I'm sorry, but I'm going to fix this." Then Eleanor Mercer walked out into the November darkness, climbed onto Willow, and rode toward Denver without looking back. Eleanor made it as far as the outskirts of Denver before the reality of what she'd done hit her like a physical blow. She'd left Caleb injured and drugged with laudanum, had abandoned him without even saying goodbye properly. He'd wake up alone, would read her letter and know exactly where she'd gone, and there would be nothing he could do to stop her. The guilt was crushing, but so was the necessity. Someone had to do something, and Caleb was in no condition to travel. This was on her. She sold Willow to a livery stable owner for less than the mare was worth, guilt twisting her stomach at the betrayal but needing the money more than sentiment. The man agreed to send word to Caleb about where the horse was at least. It was something. The train ticket to Omaha took most of her funds. From there, she'd have to find work, earn enough for the next leg. It would take weeks, maybe longer, but she had no other choice. The journey east was brutal. November had brought early winter storms, and the train got stuck twice in snowdrifts, adding days to the trip. Eleanor spent those delays in frigid depots, rationing the little food she'd brought, trying not to think about Caleb waking up to find her gone, trying not to imagine his face when he read the letter explaining why she'd left. In Omaha, she found work at a boarding house washing linens and serving meals. The owner, a war widow named Mrs. Chen, took one look at Eleanor's pale face and shaking hands and offered room and board in addition to wages. "You're running from something," Mrs. Chen said bluntly on Eleanor's first night. "Don't bother denying it. I know the look." "I'm running toward something," Eleanor corrected quietly. "Trying to fix a mistake." Mrs. Chen didn't push for details, and Eleanor was grateful. She worked 12-hour days, her hands chapped raw from lye soap, her back aching from hauling heavy loads. The pregnancy made everything harder. She had to disappear several times a day to be sick, had to force herself to eat even when her stomach rebelled. It took 3 weeks to save enough for the next train ticket. 3 weeks of wondering if Caleb had found her letter, if he'd tried to follow her, if he'd given up and let the bank take the ranch. 3 weeks of nightmares about what would happen when she reached Boston. She arrived in the city on a gray December morning with snow falling in thick, wet flakes. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, dirtier. Or maybe she'd just changed, had grown used to wide open spaces and clean mountain air. Eleanor didn't go straight to Thomas's house. Instead, she found a cheap room in a boarding house near the docks and spent 2 days watching his Beacon Hill mansion from a distance, learning his patterns. He left for his office at 9 each morning, returned at 6 in the evening. The staff was minimal, a housekeeper who came 3 days a week, a cook who arrived each afternoon to prepare dinner. On the third day, Eleanor waited until Thomas left, then approached the servants' entrance. She knocked, and when the cook opened the door, Eleanor pulled out the story she'd rehearsed. "I'm here about the silver Mrs. Whitmore wanted polished. The pieces from the estate sale?" It was a gamble, but servants talked, and Eleanor was counting on the cook being new enough not to know that there had never been any Mrs. Whitmore, that Thomas had never married. The cook frowned. "I don't know anything about that. You'll have to come back when Mr. Whitmore is home. He specifically said to come while he was out, that he didn't want to be bothered with household matters." Eleanor made her voice confident, like she belonged there. "If I don't get this done today, there'll be trouble." The cook hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. The silver's in the dining room sideboard. Be quick about it, though. I've got dinner to prepare." Eleanor's heart hammered as she stepped into the house she'd fled months ago. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The dark wallpaper, the heavy furniture, the oppressive silence. She could almost feel Thomas's presence, the weight of 3 years of fear pressing down on her shoulders. She forced herself to move. The dining room was empty, and the sideboard held exactly what she'd hoped for, not just silver, but the small mahogany box where Thomas kept her mother's jewelry. He'd shown it to her once, told her it would be hers when she learned to behave properly, as if her mother's pearls and rings were rewards for obedience. Eleanor grabbed the box and as much of the silver as she could fit in her bag. The weight was substantial, enough to pay off Caleb's debt and then some. She was turning to leave when she heard the front door open. Thomas's voice echoed through the house. "Mrs. Hall, I forgot some documents. I'll just be a moment." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the dining room had no closets, no good cover. If Thomas came in here, she didn't think. Just ran for the servants' stairs, taking them 2 at a time, her bag banging against her hip. Behind her, she heard Thomas call out, "Mrs. Hall, was someone in the dining room?" Eleanor burst through the door at the top of the stairs and found herself in the second-floor hallway. Her old bedroom was 3 doors down. She ducked inside and locked the door, pressing her back against it while her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. Thomas's footsteps came up the main staircase. "Eleanor, is that you?" How did he know? Had the cook told him? Had he seen her from the window? "I know you're here." Thomas's voice was cold, controlled. "I've been expecting you, actually. Knew you'd come back eventually, though I'm surprised it took this long. Your husband finally tire of playing protector?" Eleanor didn't answer, barely dared to breathe. She heard him try several doors, moving closer to her room. "You've caused me considerable trouble, Eleanor. Do you have any idea how much money I've spent trying to retrieve you? How much damage you've done to my reputation?" His voice was right outside her door now. "But I'm willing to forgive you. Come out, return what you've stolen, and we can discuss the terms of your return to my household." "I'm not coming back," Eleanor said, hating how her voice shook. "And I didn't steal anything. The jewelry was my mother's. It should have been mine when she died. Everything in this house is mine, including you, until you turn 25. The door handle rattled as Thomas tried it. "Open this door, Eleanor." "No." Then I'll break it down. Don't think I won't. Eleanor looked around desperately. The window, it was the same window she'd climbed out of to escape the first time. But she was on the second floor, and she was pregnant now. A fall could kill the baby, could kill her. But staying meant surrendering everything she'd fought for. Thomas hit the door hard, and the frame cracked. Another hit, and it would give way. Eleanor made her decision. She unlocked the window and shoved it open, cold December air rushing in. The trellis her father had built for her mother's roses still clung to the side of the house, though it looked more fragile than she remembered. The door splintered behind her as Eleanor climbed out onto the trellis. Thomas appeared in the doorway, just as she started her descent. "Stop!" His voice cracked with genuine alarm. "Eleanor, for the love of... you'll kill yourself." "Better than letting you lock me away," Eleanor shot back, climbing down as fast as she dared. The trellis groaned under her weight, old wood protesting. She was halfway down when one of the supports gave way with a sharp crack. Eleanor grabbed for the nearest handhold, but her fingers slipped on the frost-covered wood. For one weightless moment she was falling, and all she could think was the baby, the baby, the baby. She hit the snow-covered ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her left ankle, and when she tried to stand, her leg gave out beneath her. "Eleanor." Thomas was at the window above, and the shock in his voice sounded almost genuine. "Don't move. I'm coming down." But Eleanor was already moving, dragging herself up using the wall for support. Her ankle screamed in protest, but it bore weight. Sprained, not broken. She could work with sprained. She limped as fast as she could toward the street, every step agony, her bag of stolen valuables clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard Thomas shouting for someone to stop her, but the street was empty except for a passing carriage. Eleanor flagged it down desperately. "Please, I need to get to the train station. It's an emergency." The driver looked at her disheveled appearance with suspicion, but Eleanor pulled out the last of her money and thrust it at him. "Please." He helped her into the carriage, and they lurched into motion just as Thomas burst out of his front door. Eleanor watched through the window as he stood in the street, watching her escape for the second time, his face twisted with impotent rage. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The relief lasted until she reached the train station and realized she had no money left for a ticket. She'd given it all to the carriage driver. Eleanor sat on a bench with her throbbing ankle elevated and tried not to cry. She'd come so far, had risked everything, and now she was stuck in Boston with a bag full of jewelry she couldn't sell without drawing attention. "Excuse me, miss. You look like you could use some help." Eleanor looked up to find an elderly woman standing beside her bench, concern written on her weathered face. "I'm fine," Eleanor said automatically. "You're crying and holding your ankle, and you look about 2 seconds from passing out. That's not fine in my book." The woman sat down beside her. "I'm Margaret Patterson. My son's the station master here. What's your story?" Or something about the woman's no-nonsense kindness broke through Eleanor's defenses. "I need to get back to Colorado Territory, but I don't have money for a ticket. I have valuables I could sell, but you're afraid whoever you're running from will find you if you try to sell them in Boston." Margaret nodded like this made perfect sense. "How much do you need?" "I can't ask you for money. You didn't ask. I offered. How much?" Eleanor named the price of a ticket to Denver. Margaret pulled out her coin purse without hesitation and counted out bills. "This is too much," Eleanor protested. "I couldn't possibly—" "Consider it a loan. When you get settled, you send it back to Margaret Patterson, care of Boston Central Station." The old woman pressed the money into Eleanor's hands. "I've got 6 daughters, and every one of them has needed help at some point. Us women have to look out for each other." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you. Just get yourself home safe and get that ankle looked at when you can." The train west left within the hour. Eleanor sat in the passenger car with her injured ankle propped on her bag and watched Boston disappear behind her. She'd gotten what she'd come for, had survived another encounter with Thomas. Now she just had to get back to Caleb and hope he'd forgive her for leaving. The journey back was longer than the trip east, complicated by holiday travel and winter storms. Eleanor spent a miserable Christmas day stuck in a Kansas depot, eating stale bread and trying not to think about Caleb spending the holiday alone and hurt. She finally reached Denver in early January, nearly 6 weeks after she'd left. Her ankle had healed to a dull ache, and her pregnancy was starting to show despite her attempts to hide it. She sold half the jewelry to a reputable dealer in Denver, keeping her mother's pearls and wedding ring for herself. The amount was more than enough to pay off Caleb's mortgage with money left over. Eleanor paid the bank directly, got the receipt marked paid in full, and only then allowed herself to believe she'd actually succeeded. Now came the hard part, going home and facing what she'd done. Eleanor hired a wagon to take her back to the ranch, unable to ride horseback with her healing ankle. The driver dropped her off at the property line, and she walked the last quarter mile on foot, her bag heavy with the remaining valuables, and the precious receipt that proved the ranch was safe. It was late afternoon, the January sun already sinking toward the mountains. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and Eleanor could see horses in the corral. Someone was home. She was halfway to the porch when the door flew open and Caleb appeared. He'd lost weight, she noticed with a pang. His face was thinner, harder, and when he saw her, the expression that crossed his features was too complex to parse. Relief, fury, joy, betrayal, all fighting for dominance. Eleanor. Her name came out rough, like his throat was raw from screaming. "You're alive." "I'm alive." She stopped a few feet from the porch, suddenly uncertain. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" Caleb laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "I'm way past angry, Eleanor. I woke up to find you gone, found that letter saying you'd gone back to Boston to face Thomas alone, and I couldn't—" His voice cracked. "I couldn't come after you. I was hurt. I had no money. The ranch was falling apart, and all I could do was wait and pray you'd come back in one piece." "I'm sorry." The words were completely inadequate. "I'm so sorry, but I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and watch Thomas destroy everything we'd built." "So you nearly got yourself killed instead. That was your solution?" Caleb descended the porch steps, and Eleanor saw that he was shaking with suppressed emotion. "Do you have any idea what these past 6 weeks have been like? Wondering if you were dead, if Thomas had locked you away, if I'd ever see you again? I left you a letter." "A letter explaining that you were throwing yourself into danger, and there was nothing I could do to stop you. That's supposed to make it better?" Eleanor pulled the receipt from her bag with trembling hands. "I got the money. I paid off the mortgage. The ranch is safe." Caleb stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "You... what?" "I went to Boston, broke into Thomas's house, took my mother's jewelry that he'd stolen, sold it, and paid your debt." The words came out in a rush. "The ranch is yours free and clear. We're safe. The baby's safe." "The baby!" Caleb's eyes dropped to her stomach, where the pregnancy was now visible. "You traveled across the country while pregnant, climbed out windows, faced down Thomas, all to save a ranch I was ready to walk away from?" "It's not just a ranch. It's your dream, your home. It's where we're building our life." Eleanor took a step closer. "And I couldn't let Thomas take that from us. I couldn't let him win. He could have killed you." Caleb's voice broke completely. "You could have died. And the last thing I would have said to you was get some rest while I slept off laudanum. Do you understand how that's been eating at me? I know. I know I hurt you by leaving, by not trusting you to find another solution. But Caleb, I'm not that scared girl who stepped off the train anymore. I'm stronger now. You made me stronger. And sometimes being strong means doing terrifying things to protect what you love." Caleb closed the distance between them and pulled her into a crushing embrace that made her gasp. "Don't ever do that to me again," he said against her hair. "Don't ever leave without saying goodbye. I can't go through that again." "I won't, I promise." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke and home. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the January wind howled around them. Finally, Caleb pulled back enough to look at her face. "Tell me what happened." "Everything." So Eleanor did. She told him about the journey east, about Mrs. Chen and Margaret Patterson, about breaking into Thomas's house and climbing out the window, about her injured ankle and the desperate flight to the train station. She left nothing out, even the parts that made her look foolish or reckless. When she finished, Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right that you're not the same person who arrived here. That woman would never have had the courage to do what you just did." Is that a compliment or criticism? Both, I think. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'm proud of you and furious with you in equal measure. Probably going to feel that way for a while." "That's fair." Eleanor touched his face gently. "How are you? Did the injuries heal properly?" "Well enough. Marcus basically moved in for a few weeks to make sure I didn't do anything stupid while I recovered." Caleb caught her hand and pressed it to his chest. "He's the one who kept me sane, kept insisting you'd come back. I wasn't always sure I believed him." "I'll always come back to you." Eleanor said it like a vow. No matter what happens, this is where I belong, with you. Caleb kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to convince himself she was real. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "Come inside," he said roughly. "You're freezing and you need to rest. We can figure out the rest later." The cabin felt exactly the same and completely different all at once. Someone, probably Marcus, had kept it clean and maintained in her absence. Eleanor sank into the rocking chair by the fire, while Caleb heated water for tea. "Did Thomas come here?" she asked. "After I left?" "Once, about 2 weeks after you ran off." Caleb handed her a steaming cup. "He was looking for you, assumed you'd come back here instead of actually going to Boston. Sheriff Morrison sent him packing again, made it clear he wasn't welcome in Colorado. He won't give up completely. Even with the debt paid and me out of his reach, he'll still be angry." "Let him be angry in Boston. Out here, he's just another Eastern blowhard with more money than sense." Caleb settled onto the floor beside her chair. "We've got bigger things to worry about now, like preparing for a baby." "The baby?" Eleanor's hand went to her stomach instinctively. "I felt it move on the train. Just little flutters, but it was real." "When are you due?" "Late May or early June, I think. It's hard to know exactly." Caleb rested his hand over hers on her stomach, and they sat like that in comfortable silence while the fire crackled. After the chaos and fear of the past months, the simple domesticity felt almost miraculous. Over the next few weeks, they settled back into the rhythms of ranch life. Eleanor was slower now, tiring easily, but she helped where she could. Caleb was protective to the point of being overbearing, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a book. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one morning when he tried to stop her from gathering eggs. "I know, but you just got back from nearly dying multiple times, so forgive me for being careful." They argued about it, made up, argued again. It was normal and infuriating and completely wonderful. They were learning how to be married for real now, not just surviving crisis after crisis, but actually building a life together. In February, a letter arrived from Boston. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it, afraid it was from Thomas. Instead, it was from Margaret Patterson. "Dear Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you safe at home. I wanted you to know that Thomas Whitmore came to the station asking about you. I told him I'd never heard your name. He didn't believe me, but there was nothing he could do about it. I also wanted you to know that word is spreading in Boston about his treatment of you. Several young women have come forward with similar stories about his cruelty. The man is losing his standing in society, slowly but surely. Sometimes justice takes time, but it comes. Be well, and don't worry about repaying that loan. Consider it a gift from one survivor to another. Margaret." Eleanor read the letter to Caleb, her voice breaking on the last lines. He's facing consequences. After all this time, people are actually seeing him for what he is. Good, Caleb said fiercely. He deserves worse, but it's a start. March brought early spring to the valley, and with it, new life. The cattle calved successfully, and Caleb hired 2 additional hands to help with the expanding operation. With the debt gone, he could actually invest in improvements. New fencing, a larger barn, more breeding stock. Eleanor watched him come back to life, saw the stress and fear fade from his face as he realized they were actually going to make it. The ranch was thriving, they had money saved, and a baby was coming. Against all odds, they'd built something real. One evening in late April, Eleanor was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when she felt a sharp, cramping pain low in her abdomen. She gasped, her hand going to her stomach. "What is it?" Caleb was beside her instantly. "The baby? I don't know. Maybe?" Another cramp hit, stronger this time. Caleb, I think something's wrong." They rode to town in the wagon, Caleb pushing the horses harder than was probably safe. Doc Patterson examined Eleanor and emerged from his office with a reassuring smile. False labor. Common in first pregnancies, especially this close to the due date. "The baby's fine, just getting ready to make an appearance soon." "How soon?" Eleanor asked. "Could be days, could be weeks. But I'd stay close to home if I were you." The baby came 2 weeks later, on a warm May evening when the valley was painted gold with sunset. Eleanor's labor started just after dinner, and by midnight, Doc Patterson had been summoned and was setting up in their bedroom. The labor was long and brutal. Eleanor had thought she understood pain after years with Thomas, but this was something else entirely. Wave after wave of agony that left her gasping and sweating. Caleb stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, letting her scream at him when the pain got too bad. "I can't do this," she sobbed around 3 in the morning. I can't. It's too much. You can, Caleb said firmly. You climbed out a second-story window pregnant and escaped across the country. You can do this. And somehow, she did. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting their bedroom in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor pushed one final time and felt the baby slide free in a rush of relief so intense she nearly passed out. A cry split the air, thin and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a boy, Doc Patterson announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. Healthy lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for. Congratulations. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket. Then Caleb was placing their son in her arms, and Eleanor looked down at the tiny face and felt her heart crack wide open. He's perfect, she whispered. He's got your nose, Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. And he's already scowling like you do when you're annoyed. Eleanor laughed through her tears. What should we name him? They'd discussed names, but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son's face, Eleanor knew exactly what felt right. James, she said. After my father, James Mercer. James Mercer, Caleb repeated, testing it out. I like it. The baby, James, made a small sound and nuzzled against Eleanor's chest. She guided him to nurse, and when he latched on and began feeding with single-minded determination, she felt something shift inside her. This was what she'd been fighting for all along, this moment, this family, this chance at a life that wasn't defined by fear and pain. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor learned the exhausting reality of caring for a newborn. James had excellent lungs and used them frequently, especially at night. She was constantly tired, constantly covered in milk or spit up, constantly wondering if she was doing anything right. But she was also happier than she'd ever been. Watching Caleb hold their son with such tender care, seeing the wonder on his face when James grabbed his finger, hearing the silly songs Caleb sang while changing diapers, it all felt like a gift she didn't quite deserve but was grateful for anyway. Marcus came by to meet the baby and brought his wife, Sarah, who took one look at Eleanor's exhausted face and insisted on helping with the household chores for a few hours so Eleanor could sleep. It was a kindness that made Eleanor cry, though she blamed the tears on being tired. In June, another letter arrived from Boston. This time it was from a lawyer Eleanor had never heard of. Dear Mrs. Mercer, I represent several young women who have filed complaints against Thomas Whitmore for assault and unlawful imprisonment. Your testimony regarding your treatment while under his guardianship would greatly strengthen our case. If you're willing to provide a written statement, please contact my office. Sincerely, Robert Chen. Attorney at law Eleanor showed the letter to Caleb. Robert Chen. Any relation to Mrs. Chen in Omaha, you think? Probably her son. She mentioned he was a lawyer. Caleb read the letter carefully. You going to do it? Testify against Thomas? Eleanor looked out the window at the valley spread before them, at the life they'd built here. She thought about all the other women who'd suffered under Thomas's cruelty, who were finally brave enough to speak up. Yes, she said. I'm going to do it. She spent a week composing her statement, detailing every beating, every cruelty, every moment of fear she'd endured in Thomas's house. It was painful to put it all on paper, to relive those 3 years, but it was also cathartic, a final purging of the poison he'd left in her. When she finished, she sent it to Robert Chen and tried not to think about what would happen next. That was Boston's problem now, not hers. Summer settled over the ranch in waves of golden warmth. James grew bigger and more alert, fascinated by everything around him. Eleanor would sit with him on the porch in the evenings, pointing out the mountains and cattle and clouds, telling him stories about his grandparents and the life she hoped he'd have. In August, word came that Thomas Whitmore had been arrested. The trial would be in September, and while Eleanor's testimony wouldn't be needed in person, her written statement was enough. She followed the news from a distance through letters from Robert Chen. Thomas tried every trick in his considerable arsenal. He hired expensive lawyers, called in favors from powerful friends, attempted to paint the women as liars and hysterics. But there were too many of them, and their stories lined up too well. The evidence was overwhelming. In October, Thomas Whitmore was convicted of assault and unlawful imprisonment. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and his considerable fortune was divided among his victims as restitution. When the news reached Colorado, Eleanor sat on the porch with the letter in her hands and cried. Not tears of joy exactly, but of release. It was over. Thomas couldn't hurt her anymore, Couldn't hurt anyone anymore. She was finally, truly free. "You all right?" Caleb asked, settling beside her with James in his arms. "I am. I really am." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. "It's strange, you know. I spent so long being afraid of him, running from him, fighting against him, and now he's just gone, locked away. It almost doesn't feel real. It's real. And you helped make it happen by being brave enough to speak up." Caleb shifted James so he could put his arm around Eleanor. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. Look at what we built." Eleanor gestured to the ranch spread before them, the expanded barn, the healthy cattle, the garden she'd planted that was now bursting with late-season vegetables. "A year ago, we were drowning in debt and fear. Now look at us." "Now look at us," Caleb agreed softly. The first snow came in November, dusting the valley in white. Eleanor stood at the window watching it fall while James napped in the cradle Caleb had built. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived here, terrified, broken, barely able to look Caleb in the eye. That woman felt like a stranger now. Eleanor had learned what it meant to be strong, not in spite of her fear, but because of it. She'd learned that love wasn't about control or perfection, but about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you were born into, but something you built with your own hands. She'd also learned that healing wasn't linear. There were still nights when she woke gasping from nightmares of Thomas. Still moments when Caleb moved too quickly and her body tensed with old instincts. Still days when the weight of everything she'd survived threatened to crush her. But those moments were getting fewer and farther between. And when they came, Caleb was there. Patient, steady, reminding her that she was safe now, that she'd always be safe with him. The door opened and Caleb came in from the barn, stamping snow off his boots. "First real snow of the season. Marcus says we're in for a hard winter." "Then we'll survive a hard winter," Eleanor said. "We've survived worse." Caleb crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that, watching the snow fall, listening to their son's soft breathing from the cradle. "I never thanked you properly," Eleanor said quietly. "For answering my letter that first time. For taking a chance on a stranger who was clearly running from something. I never thanked you for being brave enough to send it. For trusting me when you had no reason to trust anyone." Caleb pressed a kiss to her temple. "We saved each other, Eleanor. That's how this works." It was true, she realized. Caleb had given her safety and space to heal, but she'd given him purpose and family, had filled his lonely cabin with laughter and life. They'd needed each other in ways neither of them had fully understood at the time. James stirred in his cradle, making the small sounds that meant he'd be awake and demanding food soon. Eleanor went to pick him up, cradling his warm weight against her chest. "What are you going to tell him?" Caleb asked. "When he's old enough to understand? About how we met? About Boston? About all of it?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "The truth. That sometimes life knocks you down so hard you think you'll never get up again. But if you're brave enough to keep trying, if you're lucky enough to find people who'll stand beside you, you can build something beautiful from the wreckage." "That's a good answer." Caleb came to stand beside her, looking down at their son with unmistakable love. "Think he'll appreciate the poetry of it? Probably not. He'll probably just be embarrassed that his parents were once young and desperate and in love." Eleanor smiled. "But that's all right. He'll have his own story to live." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly, and the three of them stood together. A family forged from desperation and choice, from fear and courage, from two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole. Eleanor looked at her life now and barely recognized it from the nightmare she'd escaped. The ranch was thriving, expanding every season. She and Caleb had paid off not just the mortgage, but had savings for the first time, enough to weather bad years and plan for good ones. James was healthy and growing, already showing signs of his father's stubbornness and his mother's determination. She'd started teaching reading to the few children who lived in the area, holding classes twice a week in the cabin. It wasn't the same as the dream she'd had of becoming a teacher in Boston, but it was something. Her own small way of giving back. And Caleb had become not just her husband, but her partner in every sense. They made decisions together, fought and made up, challenged each other to be better. He'd never raised a hand to her, never used his physical strength as a weapon, never made her feel small or worthless. Instead, he'd shown her what love actually looked like when it wasn't twisted by cruelty. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noticing her faraway expression. How far we've come. How different everything is from what I expected when I stepped off that train. Better or worse? Better. So much better than I ever imagined possible. Eleanor shifted James to her shoulder, patting his back gently. I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, that I'd used up my share when my parents were alive, and after that was just survival. And now I know I was wrong. Happiness isn't something you use up. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice. And sometimes you have to fight like hell to protect it. Caleb pulled her close, careful not to crush James between them. I love you, Eleanor Mercer, for your strength and your stubbornness and your refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. I love you too, for seeing me when I was invisible, for being patient when I was impossible, for giving me a home when I had nothing. Eleanor kissed him softly, for being the answer to a letter I was terrified to send. James chose that moment to let out an indignant wail, demanding attention. They both laughed, and Eleanor settled into the rocking chair to feed him, while Caleb started preparing dinner. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without struggles, but hers. Built on her own terms, with a man who treated her like an equal, in a place that felt like home in ways Boston never had. Years later, when James was old enough to ask questions, Eleanor would tell him the whole story. About the desperate girl who escaped out a window, about the lonely rancher who offered safety to a stranger, about how two broken people had somehow managed to build something whole together. She'd tell him that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward anyway. That love is action, not words. It's standing beside someone through the storms, choosing them again and again, even when it's hard. She'd tell him that sometimes the worst moments of your life lead you exactly where you need to be. That running away can actually be the bravest thing you do. That family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most. But for now, in this moment, Eleanor just held her son and watched the snow fall and felt grateful. Grateful for the advertisement that had saved her life, for the man who'd answered her desperate letter, for the baby who'd made their family complete. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings and the possibility of happiness after despair. The ranch stretched out before them, solid and real and theirs. The mountains stood guard over the valley, unchanging and eternal. And in the cabin they'd made into a home, Eleanor Mercer finally allowed herself to believe in forever. She'd traveled a long road from the frightened woman on the train to the person she was now. She'd learned that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it was standing your ground. Sometimes it was knowing when to run. Sometimes it was just getting up every morning and choosing to try again. She'd learned that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, and she'd found that feeling here in the arms of a man who'd promised her safety and delivered so much more. Most importantly, she'd learned that her story didn't have to be defined by what had been done to her. She could write her own ending, could choose love over fear, hope over despair, life over mere survival. And that was exactly what she'd done. Outside, the Colorado sun was setting over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. Inside the cabin, Eleanor Mercer held her baby close and smiled at her husband and thought about the miracle of being exactly where she belonged. The dangerous journey west had indeed led her to peace, to family, to the life she was always meant to have. Not because it was easy, but because she'd fought for it. Because they'd both fought for it together. And that made all the difference.